This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate what if Naruto was adopted by Iroh. If you enjoy this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now, wasting no time, let's start the story.
A huge fleet of more than 100 metal warships, headed by a gigantic Empire-class battleship, was currently sailing from the Earth Kingdom's eastern coast and in the middle of the ocean between the North Pole and the Western Air Temple. The greatest general in the Fire Nation, General Iroh, also referred to as the Dragon of the West, was leading this fleet. He was the crown prince of the Fire Nation, the heir apparent, and the son of Fire Lord Azulon. Iroh was currently making his way back home with his army following his abortive attempt to subdue Ba Sing Se. Iroh had successfully breached the outer wall and besieged the city for 600 days, an accomplishment never before or since the start of the war. However, Iroh abandoned the siege and chose to take his army home after his only son Lu Ten was killed on the front lines before he could breach the inner wall. Right now, Iroh was thinking about his now dead son while standing on the catwalk of his ship's bridge and gazing out to sea. "Captain, I want you to signal the rest of the fleet and tell them that we're to head west instead of south," Iroh said shortly after summoning his ship's captain. The captain questioned, "But sir, why? There is a large storm coming. I can smell it in the air and tell by the way the sea gulls are flying," replied Iroh. "But sir, are you sure? There's not a cloud in the sky, the weather is perfect, and if we do this, it will delay our return to the Fire Nation by several weeks, if not more," replied the captain. "Trust me, Captain, I'm sure. So please signal the fleet, as I'm sure the men would rather delay returning home by a few weeks rather than never returning at all," replied Iroh. The captain agreed, saying, "Very well, sir. I will signal the ships and have the fleet turn west." Iroh said, "Thank you, Captain." The captain saluted and returned to the bridge, but Iroh kept gazing off into the distance. Unfortunately, the storm was much bigger than they had anticipated, and they were still caught by it despite the fleet making the changes as Iroh had instructed in moving west. Fortunately, though, Iroh's leadership allowed the fleet to remain united, and while they did sustain some damage and lose a few men, most of them managed to survive. Some ships did, however, suffer significant engine damage, and others lost important rations. Furthermore, the fleet discovered that they had been blown far northwest and were now too far from land to proceed without first docking somewhere else. After evaluating all the damage, Iroh made the decision to look for a place where they could repair their ships and obtain supplies and fresh water. The fleet and all of its members were starting to lose hope that they would find land after sailing for almost a week without seeing any land, and they were beginning to believe that they would never be able to return home to their families. When all hope was lost, however, a sizable landmass was spotted, and shortly after, they discovered a city with a sizable area where they could repair and resupply. Naturally, many city dwellers became alarmed upon seeing the enormous fleet of unidentified metal warships, thinking that a foreign power had arrived to subjugate them. Iroh arrived on shore in a small boat with a small escort, knowing what would happen. Iroh then met with the city's lord, explaining the state of his fleet and reassuring him that neither he nor his fleet intended to invade the city or their nation. Naturally, the lord continued to doubt Iroh's story, thinking it might be a ruse to get them to let their guard down so that Iroh and his army could easily take the city. However, they eventually reached a consensus that only 3 ships at a time could be brought to the docks for repairs, and the bulk of Iroh's fleet would stay out at sea. Under strict guard, the ship crews would stay aboard their vessels. However, as long as they didn't cause any trouble, small groups of unarmed soldiers and crewmen would be permitted to enter and wander the city while on shore leave. The ships would receive food and water supplies, but Iroh and his fleet would be responsible for paying for all of them as well as the supplies needed to repair the ships. Fortunately, Iroh had plenty of gold aboard the fleet, so payment was not a big problem. However, the arrangement would make their time away from home longer. A few days later, in Konoha, an 8-year-old Naruto was currently attempting to hide from a group of irate villagers while running through the streets while sporting black shorts, sandals, and a white shirt with spirals on it. A group of irate individuals would chase Naruto every week, shouting things like, "Die demon," and "Kill the demon spawn," among other things. One of 3 things would occur when this occurred. They would corner him and beat him, or he would find a place to hide from them, or Anbu, a group of masked ninjas, would arrive, knock the people unconscious and take them away, returning him to his tiny apartment before departing. While running, he soon came to a wooden fence at the end of an alleyway, where he could squeeze himself into a tiny opening in the fence. He dashed to the fence wall and squeezed through the opening. He swiftly located a brown box and placed it in front of his end of the portal to provide some camouflage once he was out of the hole. Naruto heard the voices of those pursuing him from behind the fence as soon as he did this. One man asked, "Where did the demon brat go?" Another man remarked, "I'm not sure. I thought I saw him turn into this alley." Well, he clearly not here, as the only things I can see are some old wooden boxes, and they're too small for him to hide in, said a female. Another man said, well, he couldn't have gone far, let's find him, and Naruto heard them fleeing in a different direction. Naruto sighed and collapsed against the wooden fence as the group of people departed. Even though he had avoided another beating this time, he couldn't help but question whether he would the next time or the week after. Since he was 5 years old, he has been the target of weekly attacks, insults, beatings, and various names. But what really irritated Naruto were the irate looks he would receive from the public and, worse of all, their disregard for him as though he didn't exist. As Naruto sat on the ground, he wondered, why do they hate me? Why do they call me demon? What did I ever do to have them so angry at me? The Hokage, who acted as a sort of grandfather figure to him, was the only person who had ever truly shown him kindness. The same thing happened when he asked the Hokage if he knew anything about his parents. He would always change the topic or not respond at all when he asked why the people detested him so much. Since he had not passed the graduation exam to become a genin, Naruto was even more depressed today. Since he thought that becoming a shinobi would be the only way for people to recognize him, he had hoped that if he could train to become the Hokage, they would stop hating him and treat him with respect. However, he was now starting to question whether that would ever occur because, even if he joined the village's ninja force, would they ever accept him and allow him to be Hokage? In addition, how many more beatings would he have to endure before they stopped? He started to get increasingly angry at this point because he thought Konoha would never accept him. At that moment, Naruto made the decision to leave Konoha if he wanted to live a life of any kind. Damn it, he was done being the punching bag of the village. Naruto hurried back to his tiny, dilapidated apartment and gathered his few possessions, food, and other items before packing them into his backpack. Then, one day while hiding, he discovered a tiny hole in the village wall and used it to sneak out of the village. Naruto made the decision to take one final look at Konoha from the hillside he was standing on after a while of walking. After a few minutes of merely gazing, Naruto couldn't help but feel a little depressed because, despite all of the hardships he had experienced in Konoha, it was still the only place he had ever known. Naruto eventually ignored that emotion and began to leave, unsure if he would ever see Konoha again. A week later in the office of the Hokage was sitting at his desk right now, with a file on Naruto and a small picture of him in the upper left corner. One whole week had passed since Naruto vanished from the village, and he had yet to be found. When the Hokage decided to use his magical crystal ball to check on Naruto 2 days after he had departed, he was unable to locate him inside the village or anywhere close to it. The Hokage immediately summoned all of the shinobi he had on hand and ordered them to look for Naruto. Sadly, they were unable to locate him, and his apartment appeared to have been abandoned for a number of days. Additionally, the day after Naruto left, there was a lot of rain, which erased any traces he might have left for the Inuzuka clan members to follow. The civilian members of the council appeared pleased and even proposed that they celebrate when they learned that they had no idea where Naruto had gone or what path he had taken. Sarutobi swiftly put that down after saying that if there was any sort of celebration in the village, people would end up spending the following 3 months in an underground holding cell that was 8 by 10. However, the elders were extremely worried that Naruto might have been abducted by one of the other shinobi villages in an attempt to undermine Konoha while simultaneously bolstering themselves. Since Konoha's barrier team had claimed that no intruders had entered the village, Sarutobi promptly declared that Naruto had not been abducted, leaving the only tenable explanation as his having simply left the village. The idea of the Kya, Bai no Yako's Jincha, Riki wandering outside the village naturally alarmed the elders. Particularly since there was a strong possibility that he would be found and turned against them by another village. Naruto, my boy, where are you? Sarutobi thought lamentingly as he gazed at the file's image of a happy, youthful Naruto. Shortly after, the Hokage placed the file back on the table and gazed sorrowfully at the picture of Naruto's father, the Yondaime Hokage, who had been his predecessor and was hanging on his wall with the other Hokages. Curse people's blind anger and hatred, Naruto no doubt left due to the people persecuting him so much, something no child should go through. I'm sorry, Minato. I should have done more to protect your son, and because I did not, he has run away from here. You and Kushina must be turning in your graves for what the village has done to him. A puff was heard as the Hokage was still grousing about how he had not done enough to better protect Naruto. When the elderly Hokage looked up, he saw Hitaki Kakashi, Naruto's father's final pupil, standing in front of him. Kakashi was among the first to offer to search for Naruto when his disappearance was first reported because he felt guilty about neglecting his sensei's son. He had recently resigned in the hopes of being able to help the poor child, believing that his assignment in the Anbu Black Ops Division would make him a bad caregiver and role model. In an attempt to learn more about Naruto, Sarutobi said, Kakashi, Have you anything to report on Naruto's whereabouts? Hi Hokage. Sama, I do, responded Kakashi, although I was not able to find Naruto, I believe I have found where he might be. Where? I met a traveling merchant on the road, not far from the village, while I was looking for any sign of Naruto. I asked him if he had seen a boy with blonde hair on his way here, and after showing him a picture of Naruto, he said he had, and he told me that he had seen Naruto a few days prior. He remembered Naruto because he saw that he was traveling alone, which he found odd for a boy his age. Where was Naruto going? I urgently asked the Hokage. According to the merchant, he had seen Naruto on the road, not far from the port city Gifu, where he seemed to be heading to, replied Kakashi. The Hokage immediately gave Kakashi instructions to assemble a team made up of anyone he desired and have them depart within the hour in order to locate Naruto in Gifu. Kakashi nodded and swiftly shunshined, body flicker, away. Sarutobi turned in his chair and gazed out the window over the village, thinking, please be safe, Naruto. A port city in Gifu. Iroh was currently strolling through the streets, taking in the city's sights. The past few days had been quite interesting for him. He had purchased a number of items, including books and maps about the continent. He found it amusing, if not ironic, that the country he was in was called Fire Country. He also wondered about the neighboring Tea Country, wishing he had the time to visit and sample some of the country's namesake. He also found it fascinating how very different this land was from the Fire Nation and the other four great nations. In this land they had people called shinobi, who were skilled in the art of assassination and could do many different and wondrous things, like change into different things and make copies of themselves. He also learned that they could do things that they called jutsus, which resembled bending, but they did not bend the actual elements, instead they used an energy called chakra to mimic bending. But still, from what he read about it all, it was still quite powerful, and what was even more interesting was that unlike four great nations, these shinobi could learn to use more than one element, whether it was through training or natural ability. He even learned that these shinobi in a way had their own countries inside the official countries of the ones they lived in. This was shown by how they had their own land, laws, traditions, and ruled themselves by electing their own leaders. Although these leaders still answered to the lords of the countries they lived in, who were called daimyos, and were expected to serve them during times of war. All of this was fascinating, but Iroh was particularly interested in the genetic features known as bloodlines, the abilities that were genetically passed down in particular clans. Only members of these particular families were able to manifest their abilities, leading to highly specialized styles and techniques that were exclusive to the creators. While strolling along the street, Iroh noticed a small playground where a young boy, who was probably no older than 7 or 8, and a slightly younger girl, who was obviously the boy's sister, were playing tag with their father. Iroh's face lit up with sadness when he saw this because it reminded him of the times he spent playing with his own son, Liu Ten, at that age. He was watching them when he felt someone tug on his money purse on the side of his belt. He quickly turned to see that it was a young boy with bright blonde hair that was spiky and bright, dressed in a filthy white t-shirt with a spiral on it, tattered black shorts, and broken sandals. Interestingly, the child appeared to have whisker marks on his face. Iroh pursued the boy as he fled down the street after realizing he was being pursued. With Naruto, when Naruto left Konoha, he traveled and followed the roads that people used to get to and from Konoha because he had no idea which way to go. He continued to follow the roads for a few days until he reached the shore and saw the vast ocean. This was the first time he had ever seen the sea, so he was in awe of its size. He had followed the signs that led him to the port city of Gifu, where he hoped to buy some food and possibly work to earn enough money for a place to stay before deciding what to do next. But when he arrived in Gifu, he was attacked by some older kids who stole all of his money and most of his belongings, leaving him with nothing but to sleep in a dilapidated, abandoned building. After a few more days without food, Naruto came to the conclusion that stealing was his only option if he wanted to survive. Using some of the skills he had learned in the academy, he was able to steal some fruits and other items. He didn't like stealing, but he had no other option. During his stay in Gifu, Naruto observed the enormous metal ships being repaired in the docks that belonged to the foreigners who had just arrived from a humorously named country called the Fire Nation. He even caught a glimpse of the rest of the fleet from a distance and could only imagine what it would be like to be in charge of such a large fleet. He even noticed some of the men who had come from the ships, and he was impressed by both their eerie armor and their cool red uniforms. Naruto was observing them when he noticed an older man wearing darker armor than the other foreign men, and he assumed that he was some sort of commander. Naruto also noticed a large money purse on the man's belt. He had heard from some of the city's residents that the foreign men were extremely wealthy because they had so much gold on them. Naruto chose to try and take the money purse when he saw it. He didn't want to, but he had no choice but to follow the man, but he kept a safe distance from him. He eventually stopped to watch some children playing with their father, and Naruto noticed a sad expression on his face. Naruto saw the same expression on his face, along with a hint of jealousy, because he had often wished for something similar. Having a family that loves you, and is there to support and care for you, would have been one of the most precious things he could have ever had. Pushing those thoughts aside quickly, Naruto cautiously and slowly approached the man from behind. As he began to carefully remove the man's purse, the man abruptly turned around and saw him. Fearing harsh punishment, Naruto fled as soon as he realized he had been caught. However, as he fled, he noticed that the same man was now pursuing him and telling him to stop and wait. After a few minutes of running, Naruto turned into a corner and encountered two Fire Nation soldiers who had just returned from shore leave. "Oh no, hey, kid, pay attention," as Naruto collided with one of the soldiers and he grabbed Naruto, he yelled. "I didn't do anything, so let me go." In an attempt to escape before Iroh caught up with him, Naruto sobbed as he begged the soldier to release him. But Iroh, panting heavily, came around the corner just as the soldier was ready to release him, saying, "Stop, please. Pant. Don't let him go." The breathless general uttered those words. The Dragon of the West was gasping for air when both soldiers swiftly took a stronger grip on the now struggling Naruto, begging them to release him. "Has something happened between you and this boy, General Iroh, sir?" When one of the soldiers inquired, Naruto stopped struggling. "He's a general," he thought in shock as he began to worry because he didn't think Iroh was that important. He knew he was important, but not by much, so he knew he was in serious trouble. As though there was nothing wrong with Naruto's attempt, Iroh said in a kind voice, "Ah, yes, it seems this young man decided to try and borrow some money from me without asking first." "Sir, did he try to steal from you?" As he scowled at Naruto, one of the soldiers inquired. "Sir, do you want us to take him to these authorities and turn him over to them?" the other soldier inquired. Iroh knelt down and told the men to release Naruto, saying, Now gentlemen, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation to his actions." "Now then, young man, why don't you tell us your name?" Iroh said to Naruto after they had released him. Naruto initially remained silent because he wasn't sure if he should respond and thought he should flee. However, he changed his mind because he knew that if he didn't respond, they would simply pursue him once more, which would undoubtedly draw the attention of more foreigners and result in his capture. Instead, he chose to respond to the man's questions in the hopes that they would release him. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto." Iroh introduced himself and said, "Well, Naruto, my name is Iroh. It's very nice to meet you." He then extended his hand to shake hands, and Naruto reluctantly accepted. "Now then, Naruto, why don't you tell me why were you trying to steal my money? Surely you know that stealing is wrong." Iroh replied with kindness. Naruto said somberly, "I know, but I had no choice. I was hungry and I had no money to buy any food. I didn't want to but I had to." Although he didn't particularly enjoy stealing, he had no other option. Iroh answered, "If you were hungry, then why did you not go home? Surely your parents would give you something to eat," but he quickly regretted it after seeing Naruto's expression. "I don't have any parents, they died when I was born, or at least that was what I was told," said Naruto. Iroh had seen more than his fair share of orphans during the war, many of whom he created while his army battled the Earth Kingdom, so when he realized that Naruto was an orphan, a dejected expression came over his face. "I'm sorry to hear that, Naruto, but do you have a place to live or someone to look after you?" Iroh inquired. "No, not really. I lived alone in a tiny, outdated apartment for as long as I can remember, and the Hokage was the only one who made a sincere effort to look after me. I fled because everyone else there despises me, calls me derogatory names, and beats me up." And Iroh could not help but feel sorry for Naruto after hearing this and comprehended why he fled that location. "Naruto," Iroh said, attracting the boy's interest, "how about visiting my ship and having lunch there?" When Naruto saw one of the ships up close, a joyful expression came to his face. "Really?" he asked, and Iroh nodded. Following that, Iroh took Naruto to the docks, where they boarded a small boat to reach Iroh's command ship. Naruto was astounded by the ship's size and magnificence. Naruto asked in wonder, "You command this?" Iroh chuckled at his little joke and said, "Yes I do, although I must say it's rather hard to clean it," while Naruto merely grinned. Iroh asked the men who met them to have the cook prepare a meal for him and Naruto and to have it placed on the deck outside, stating that it was a pleasant day for an outdoor meal. Soon after, they boarded the ships. Iroh asked Naruto if he wanted to take a tour of the ship while they waited for their meal to be prepared after the men nodded and left. Naturally, Naruto enthusiastically accepted, wanting to see more of the ship. For the next hour and a half, Iroh took Naruto on a tour of the ship, showing him the mess room, the bridge, the engine room, the crew quarters, and other areas. Naturally, Naruto was thrilled to see the ship and frequently asked Iroh various questions about it. Iroh was delighted to respond, enjoying Naruto's excitement. After the tour, Iroh and Naruto went to the deck for lunch, where a medium-sized table was set with food. Naruto began eating frantically as soon as they sat down, and Iroh couldn't help but stare at him pitifully since it was clear that he hadn't had a satisfying meal in a while. Naruto stopped eating and appeared ashamed and embarrassed when he noticed Iroh staring at him. Naruto assumed that Iroh must be repulsed by his lack of manners. Iroh promptly reassured Naruto that everything was fine and that he could eat, even calling one of the men who had brought the food to bring more. Iroh couldn't help but be impressed by how much Naruto was eating. Following the completion of their meals, Iroh prepared tea for them both, and they spent the following few hours conversing on the deck. Since Iroh felt that it was always better to discuss such matters rather than keep them to himself, he eventually managed to persuade Naruto to share more about his upbringing in the village. This allowed Iroh to better understand Naruto and the struggles he faced. When Iroh learned what the majority of his village's residents had done to him, he was overcome with rage and disgust at how they had treated a young, defenseless boy. Nothing justified attacking an innocent young boy, and he was even a little tempted to have his army disembark from his fleet, march on Konoha, and burn it to the ground. Since Iroh was not a violent man, this obviously showed how furious he was, but he soon dispelled such thoughts because new violent acts only sparked more violent reactions, creating an endless cycle of hatred. Iroh then told Naruto about his son Lu-Ten and the death of his only child, as well as some of the things he had witnessed and the events that had transpired during the battle with his army. Then, for several hours until the sun began to set, the two of them kept talking. Naruto decided it would be best to return to the abandoned building where he was staying because it was going to get dark soon. "Well, I guess I should go back now. Thank you Iroh-san for lunch and for the tea. It was really nice," said Naruto. Iroh knew that Naruto didn't have a proper place to stay when he heard this because he had already surmised that if Naruto had fled and didn't have enough money to buy food or anything else, he probably didn't have a proper place to stay and probably slept on the streets or in an old, abandoned building. Iroh found this intolerable and made the decision to take action. "Nonsense Naruto, you will stay here with us on this ship," Iroh said. Even though he would have liked to stay longer on the ship with Iroh on the crew because they all seemed nice enough, Naruto said, "Thanks, Iroh-san, but I'm okay," knowing that Iroh was trying to be nice and didn't really want someone to feel sorry for him. A grinning Iroh pleaded, "Please stay Naruto, it's nice to have some youthful energy to brighten this old gloomy ship." Naruto asked, "Are you sure that it would be okay?" Iroh nodded and grinned. Naruto said, "Okay then, but I need to get some of my stuff." Iroh nodded and promised to assist Naruto in getting the items. Iroh and Naruto had some of their best moments in a long time during the next 3 days after Iroh caught him trying to pickpocket him. Iroh and Naruto were frequently spotted conversing with each other about food, the various things in Konoha or the Fire Nation, and even playing some silly games when they were together. Naruto particularly liked watching the crew and Iroh fight and use firebending, which Naruto thought was cool. At first, he believed it to be a jutsu, but Iroh quickly clarified that it wasn't because they used and summoned natural fire instead of creating it with chakra, claiming that natural fire was more powerful than fire based on chakra. However, as with all good things, their time together came to an end when Iroh's fleet was restocked with enough food and water to safely return to the Fire Nation and the damaged ships were repaired. As a result, they would be departing tomorrow morning. Iroh made his decision regarding Naruto because he was aware that if he went back to the village where he was raised, Naruto would be beaten and mistreated once more and would be left to live on the streets. Iroh had grown quite fond of Naruto in the brief time they had spent together, so he didn't want either of those things for him. The days he had spent with Naruto, playing with him or conversing with him, brought back memories of his playtime with his son Lu-Ten when he was younger and still alive. According to Naruto, he enjoyed watching the sunset because he could still see his favorite color, orange, when he and Iroh were on the ship's bow at the end of the 3rd day. Iroh made the decision to inform Naruto of his impending departure tomorrow. Iroh abruptly caught Naruto's attention by saying, "Naruto, there is something I have to tell you." Naruto asked, "What is it Iroh-san?" "I'm afraid that all my ships are repaired and so tomorrow morning my fleet will be leaving for home tomorrow." Naruto sadly exclaimed, "Oh," he had liked Iroh and had enjoyed his stay here, as he was the only person who truly showed him kindness aside from the Hokage and Tuchi, the ramen chief, and his daughter. "So I guess that this is good-bye then." "It doesn't have to be Naruto," Iroh said, bending down to approach him. Iroh was uncertain of Naruto's response, so he said, "Naruto, even though I know we have only recently met, I would like you to accompany me and if you would like, I would like to invite you to be in my family. You mean why you want to adopt me? Naruto asked, looking up at Iroh in shock upon hearing this. Iroh offered to open his heart and his home to him, even though no one had ever offered to adopt him when he was younger and living in the orphanage. At that moment, Naruto gave Iroh a hug after grinning and shedding a few tears, indicating that he had accepted Iroh's proposal to become his son. After a minute or so, Naruto released the embrace and spoke up with a hint of nervousness. Naruto asked nervously, would it be okay if I called you Dad? He wasn't sure how Iroh would respond to being called Dad because he had never had to call anyone that. Yes, it would be fine Naruto, Iroh said, grinning with a few tears in his eyes because he had never imagined being called that again. He then gave Naruto a hug in return. Iroh thought that perhaps, just possibly, fate had brought him here to meet Naruto, where they could finally find each other, become a family, and heal each other's wounds. Iroh's fleet sailed back to the Fire Nation early the following morning, and Naruto and his newly adopted father Iroh watched from the catwalk of the bridge as the elemental nations vanished into the distance. Today marked the start of his new life in the Fire Nation and the end of his previous one on the elemental continent. Later, in the late morning, Kakashi arrived in Gifu with the Konoha team he was in charge of in search of Naruto. After searching for Naruto's scent, Pakun followed him first to an old, deserted building where he probably spent some time. He then followed Naruto's scent all the way to the docks. Initially, Kakashi and the others believed that Naruto might have secretly boarded a ship headed to one of the island nations, such as Yuki no Kuni, Snow Country, Umi no Kuni, Sea Country, Mizu no Kuni, Water Country, Tasuki no Kanai, Moon Country, or even Nagi and Ouzu Islands. However, they mentioned the Fire Nation ships and how they had only departed a few hours ago when they questioned some people about any ships that might have departed in the previous few days. One of the sailors they spoke with reported seeing a young boy who fit Naruto's description board the fleet's largest ship alongside the fleet commander. Nobody knew the location of this Fire Nation when Kakashi and the others inquired about it. At first, they thought it was a joke, but they quickly discovered otherwise. All they knew for sure was that it was a nation located far from the elemental continent. Since they now had no clues as to where Naruto was going or even how to locate him, Kakashi realized that Naruto was gone and out of their grasp. I failed you, Sensei. I failed to be there for your son and protect him when he needed someone. I can only hope that wherever he is now, he is happier and safer there than he was when he was in Konoha, Kakashi said, casting a sorrowful glance at the sea horizon. We're heading back to Konoha, he said, turning to face his team. But what about Uzumaki? Shouldn't we try and chase after those ships? Replied a Chunin. What would be the point? We have no clue where they're going, or where this Fire Nation is, and even if we did, we don't know if they will give him back. According to the people here, there was over 100 ships in that fleet, each 3 times the size of any ship known here and made entirely of metal. With an entire army on board as well, what chance would we have of getting Naruto away from a force like that by ourselves? Responded Kakashi. The Chunin remained silent at this point since he understood that Kakashi was correct and that Naruto was beyond their grasp. Soon after, Kakashi and his group departed Gifu, returned to Konoha, and broke the bad news to Hokage. After listening to Kakashi's report on his search for Naruto for about an hour, the Hokage sat in the council room by himself, waiting for the council to arrive. After Kakashi completed his report, Sarutobi realized that Naruto was no longer within their reach and was devastated by the outcome, realizing that he had totally let his wife and successor down. Kakashi was also depressed by the incident and chalked it up as just another of his many shortcomings. He then went to the memorial stone to try and get forgiveness from his sensei, the Yondaime, for not protecting his son. The civilian council members, the clan leaders, the Anbu commander, and Sarutobi's advisors, the shinobi elders, soon filled the council room. After everyone had entered, Hogue's advisor and former teammate Mitokado Homura got up and spoke. Hokage. Sama, why have you called this meeting? Do you have any news on the whereabouts of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki? Not precisely, the elderly Hokage answered. Udatane Kaharu questioned, what do you mean by that Hoke-san? Although Kakashi was able to find a solid lead to Naruto and was able to track him to the port city of Gifu, we lost him there, replied Sarutobi. How? As surely the Kyuubi Jinchuriki couldn't get away from a squad of fully trained shinobis, especially one that is led by someone as skilled as Kakashi, said Kaharu. It seems that when Naruto arrived in Gifu, an armada of warships from an unknown foreign nation was off the coast of Gifu, where some of their ships were being repaired, as they had been damaged during a storm, said the Sandame. A foreign armada? Are you saying that Hai no Kuni, Fire Country, and our village are being invaded by a foreign nation, Hokage? Sama, replied Akamichi Choza. The council's fears of another war breaking out were allayed when the old Hokage said, "No, the armada," was seemingly blown of course to Hai no Kuni coastal shore, where they were only at the port for a short period of time to make repairs to their ships, and then they left soon after. Inuzuka Sume asked, "But still Hokage Sama, why does this involve the boy?" It seems that when Naruto was there, when they arrived, where he was then taken aboard the armada by the commander of the armada, a man by the name of Iroh, where Naruto then left with the armada, replied the Sandaime Hokage. The Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, the strongest Biju, was now in the hands of a foreign power, which was the worst possible scenario. As soon as Sarutobi said this, worried looks broke out among the clan heads and the elder shinobi. "Then good riddance to it," said Chijin, a member of the civilian council. "Konoha will be that much safer and better off with that thing gone." Kaharu growled angrily, "Be silent, Chijin, you fool." She didn't want to listen to the foolish outbursts of idiots who shouldn't have been on the council in the first place. "But Kaharu-san, why do you even care? You never showed any concern for it. As with it gone, we no longer have to fear the Kyuubi destroying our village, where it will become that nation's problem," Chijin said, turning to her in surprise at Kaharu's harshness. "Chijin, you idiot, haven't you fools realized already how vital the Kyuubi's power is to Konoha's strength?" Homura shouted. Oroka, another member of the civilian council, inquired, "What do you mean by that?" When the Shoden Hokage defeated Madara, he was able to gain control of the Kyuubi from Madara, after which the Shoden Hokage's wife Mito Sama sealed the Kyuubi in herself, making her the first Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Upon which the Shoden Hokage gave the Nanabi no Kabutomushi, seven-tailed horned beetle, to Takagakure, hidden waterfall, and the other 7 bijus to the other 4 great shinobi villages to try and maintain balance between the nations. Without the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, our village's strength will be severely reduced, not to mention the fact that this nation could decide to one day use the Kyuubi's power against us, harshly spoke Kaharu. The Shoden Hokage's wife was a Jinchuriki, which shocked the members of the civilian council, but they soon realized how much trouble this caused for their village. "Then we must find him and bring him back," exclaimed Tainusha, the third member of the civilian council. The old Hokage angrily exclaimed, "It's a bit late for that now, as this nation already has Naruto, and apart from that, if idiots like you had listened and respected the Yondaime Hokage's dying wish, his son would never have left the village. He no longer cared about concealing Naruto's heritage because there was no use in his absence." Everyone was shocked to learn this, with the exception of the Hokage's advisors. "SS son," Chijin said in disbelief. Sarutobi answered, "Yes, Naruto is the son of the Yondaime Hokage." Oroka exclaimed, "It's not possible. I refuse to believe that demon is the Yondaime Hokage's son. There's no wa." Before the Sandaime unleashed a strong outburst of killing intent, causing him to stop talking. "Be silent." The old Hokage yelled in a snarling voice, glaring at Oroka, who felt as though the killing intent had killed him hundreds of times. Naturally, the Sandaime's behavior shocked the other council members and the Hokage's advisors. Danzo was taken aback as well because he hadn't seen his old friend in this state in a long time, and it brought back memories of Sarutobi before he softened in Danzo's eyes. The angry old Hokage slammed his fist down on the arm of his chair angrily and glared at Oroka. "Naruto is Minato's son and is no more a demon than anyone else here, as he is just as much a human being as Mito. Sama and his mother Kushina were, and if anyone here so much as call Naruto a demon or monster again, they will answer to me," he said. He blamed Naruto's escape on the village's ignorant idiots and others like them, along with the other civilian members. Since they had never seen Sarutobi like this, the members of the civilian council were terrified. However, the old Hokage quickly calmed down, though he still gave the civilian members a warning glare. "Hokage Sama, if I may, why weren't we informed that Mito Sama and Kushina were also Jinchurikis for the Kyuubi?" Sume said after Saruobi had calmed down a little. Although she had been friends with Kushina when they were younger, she was unaware that she was the Jinchuriki for the Kyuubi because it was widely believed that Naruto was the first Kyuubi Jinchuriki. The reason was because it was for Mito Sama's and Kushina's safety, for fear of the other villages assassinating either to them to weaken Konoha or to capture them and use them against Konoha. Also, it was to make sure that we would have a hidden ace in the hole in case the village was attacked, where our enemies wouldn't know who held the Kyuubi. Not only that, it was also to allow both of them to have happy normal lives, and be accepted by the village, where they wouldn't have to suffer the harshness that other Jinchurikis in other villages went through. But sadly that didn't work for Naruto, as it became common knowledge that Naruto held the Kyuubi in him, and due to the attack, many lives were lost and people used Naruto as a scapegoat to focus their anger on, sadly replied Saruobi. Danzo asked, Do we know which country has taken Uzumaki, in an attempt to figure out where to send his route? Nins to get Naruto. When the Sandaime responded, a foreign nation called Fire Nation, the other council members gave him a lot of odd looks, but he reassured them that it was the name of the nation. Kaharu questioned, then do we know where this Fire Nation is? No, as all the people that Kakashi and his team interviewed knew it was a place far off in the south, East Sea, replied Sarutobi. Danzo asked, do you think they know about the Kyuubi? Since he didn't see any other reason why an armada commander would just take in a homeless boy unless he was valuable. I don't know, as it is unlikely given how the armada was just passing by, but even still it can't be ruled out, Sarutobi responded. Then we must send out teams and find this Fire Nation and get him back, said Tainusha. Even if we do find this Fire Nation, how do you expect us to get Naruto back, as chances are this Fire Nation will not give him up, especially if they somehow know that Naruto has the Kyuubi. Since given the description and size of the ships of this nation, the Fire Nation is more advanced militarily and technology, as the vast size of the armada means they also have an equally vast army. Where if we were to enter their country without permission it would cause an international incident and could be seen as an act of war on our part, and by just judging by the armada that was near Gifu alone, it would be a war that we would most likely lose. Especially if the Fire Daimyo doesn't support us, where he would most likely wouldn't, replied Sarutobi. Shijin said, but why wouldn't he? They stole our Jinchuriki. When told that they would be in trouble without Naruto and that he was the son of the Yondaime Hokage, Sarutobi could only laugh at how Shijin, who had been so happy about him leaving just moments before, was now demanding that they risk a war to bring him back. The Fire Daimyo would never support us if he found out how Naruto was treated here, which he would if the Fire Nation informed him of it, not to mention Naruto left with them willingly and was not forced to go. Hence the Fire Daimyo would not support us and most likely leave us to fend for ourselves, replied Sarutobi. The council realized that Naruto was now out of their grasp and that there was nothing they could do about it. Danzo secretly planned to deploy his route teams to look for and learn as much as he could about the Fire Nation at the same time. Soon after, Sarutobi adjourned the council meeting because he knew that there would be a level of commotion, fear, anxiety, and confusion that Konoha had not experienced since the Uchiha clan's massacre by its prodigy, Uchiha Itachi, last year. He was also aware that there would be a significant split in the village, primarily between the younger and older generations, once the truth about Naruto's ancestry was revealed. The Sandaime couldn't help but wish that Naruto was happier and safer wherever he was than he was in Konoha as he left the room. With Naruto was currently standing on the Empire class battleship's catwalk, gazing out over the far-off Fire Nation coast. Naruto was both anxious and thrilled to see the Fire Nation, his new house, and his new family. He has been learning as much as he can about the Fire Nation's history, culture, customs, and cuisine from his new adopted father, Iroh, over the past few weeks. Naruto also needed to learn how to write again and how to treat others with respect, as Iroh had taught him how crucial it was because disrespecting someone would have dire repercussions. Naruto found the lessons to be a little boring, but thankfully Iroh was a kind and patient teacher who kept Naruto engaged. Additionally, in his spare time, Naruto would play with Iroh or other crew members, or even pull a few harmless practical jokes that frequently helped to lighten the somber moods that the crew would typically have on board. Additionally, Iroh started teaching Naruto how to play Pai Sho. At first, Naruto showed no interest in the game, but Iroh made it engaging by offering small wagers, such as, "Dare Iroh do something funny," or, "If Naruto wins, he gets some candy." Naturally, Naruto wasn't very good at first, but he was gradually improving and becoming more confident. Iroh occasionally let Naruto win in order to keep Naruto interested. At the moment, Naruto was dressed in traditional Fire Nation, child attire that Iroh had given him after he had some of the crew make him some new clothes. Naruto was staring at the Fire Nation's mainland, which was getting larger as they got closer, when he felt a hand land on his shoulder. When he looked up, he saw his new adopted father grinning warmly and kindly at him. "So Naruto, are you excited at finally getting to see the Fire Nation?" Iroh responded. "Yeah, I am, and I'm also a little anxious," Naruto answered. "Oh, and why is that?" Naruto worriedly said, "Well, what if they don't like me, and what if they hate me like they did back at Konoha, what if?" But Iroh stopped him by raising his hand and telling him to stop. "There's no need to worry, Naruto, as you my son now, and the people will not harm you, and I certain you will be happy here and make many friends there. I even have a young nephew there named Zuko who just 2 years older than you, as well as a young niece named Azula who is the same age as you. Hence I'm certain you three will get along fine and their friends can become your friends." Iroh assured Naruto that his worries were unfounded. Since he didn't really have any friends back in Konoha, Naruto calmed down a little at this point. He was excited to meet his new cousins and hoped they would get along. Members of the royal procession greeted Iroh, Naruto, and his group as they disembarked from the ship when the Iroh's command ship eventually docked at the port close to the Fire Nation capital. An Imperial Firebender said, "General Iroh, sir, Fire Lord Ozai has instructed us to take you to the palace so he can speak with you." "Fire Lord Ozai?" Iroh asked, startled, to which the Imperial Firebender simply nodded. "What happened to my father then?" Iroh asked. "Sadly, your father Fire Lord Azulon passed away several weeks ago during the night, but before he died he declared Fire Lord Ozai to succeed him," said the Imperial Firebender. Iroh was a little saddened by this because, despite the fact that he and his father were never close and that they didn't talk much about anything other than military victories and losses, Azulon was still his father, so a tiny part of him did care for him. Iroh said, "Very well then," led the way. He then took Naruto by the hand, guided him to a palanquin that was waiting for them, and drove them to the palace. The captain was going to ask who Naruto was when the Imperial Firebenders spotted him, but Iroh just said that he was with him, and the captain nodded. Then, Iroh and Naruto grabbed the palanquin. After that, the guards surrounded them and carried them to the palace after the servants had raised them. While riding on the palanquin, Naruto peered out the curtains to see Harbor City, observing the locals and taking in the various sights. Since he had seen prominent lords ride the palanquin on multiple occasions when they visited Konoha, he thought it was amusing to be permitted to ride one for the first time. Even so, he still thought that walking was faster and that riding the palanquin made him appear and feel lazy. They finally reached the palace after roughly 2 hours of travel on the palanquin, through the Royal Caldera City itself, the Harbor City, Royal Plaza, and the Zing-Zag path that led up to the capital crater. Since Naruto had never seen anything so large in his life, he was unable to contain his amazement when he finally saw the palace. The palace was at least 3 or 4 times larger than the Hokage mansion. After the palanquin was set down, Naruto and Iroh got off. The royal procession then led them into the palace, where they passed through the spacious courtyard and the expansive corridors. At last, however, they reached the enormous double doors leading to the Fire Lord's throne room, where 2 additional Imperial Firebenders stood on either side, watching over the entrance. They started pushing the doors open when they saw Iroh, Naruto, and the royal procession approaching. After Iroh and Naruto entered the throne room, the doors closed, leaving the royal procession outside. The throne room was enormous, with black tiled floors and numerous black pillars with ornate gold bases supporting the roof. Looking ahead, Naruto saw Fire Lord Ozai sitting on an elaborate covered throne on a higher platform that was encircled by flames. Ozai was very intimidating, and Naruto was a little afraid of him. Behind the Fire Lord, he could also make out a bas-relief depiction of a dragon breathing fire. Naruto felt the Fire Lord's gaze on him as they approached, but he kept his head down because his adopted father Iroh had told him that he was not to look up at the Fire Lord unless he was asked to, and that he should always keep quiet. Naruto didn't mind because he was currently afraid of him. Fire Lord Ozai abruptly spoke up after Naruto and Iroh had dropped to their knees in front of him. Ozai scoffed at his brother's loss and remarked, "So General Iroh, you have returned from your disgraceful failure at Ba Sing Se." Naruto became enraged at the Fire Lord's insult to his adoptive father, but he stayed composed and did nothing because Iroh warned him to expect such comments from others and that he might face consequences if he responded. Naturally, Iroh was unaffected in the slightest by his younger brother's comment regarding his defeat at Ba Sing Se. "Yes, I have Fire Lord," Iroh said politely, maintaining a neutral expression. "I had expected you to return sooner with you forces. What was it that delayed you so?" Ozai asked, naturally scowling a little at his older brother's lack of reaction to his comment. "Unfortunately, my fleet had been caught in a large storm, where we were blown off course and many of my ships had suffered damage and we had to make port in a foreign land to make repairs that took some time," replied Iroh. When Ozai heard this, he became curious and asked Iroh to tell him about it. As he listened to Iroh's story, his interest in the distant foreign country that he had never heard of grew. Since he believed that there could only be one Fire Nation, he even felt a little offended that another nation shared his name. He then started asking Iroh more questions about the elemental continent. He also developed a fascination with the shinobi and their jutsu, which allowed them to use multiple elements in addition to other things, as well as their bloodlines and skills. After questioning Iroh for about an hour, Ozai gave him instructions to write a comprehensive report on everything he had learned about the elemental continent and turn it in by the following week. He then narrowed his eyes at Naruto. "So who is this? Is he some servant that you brought from this elemental continent?" replied Ozai. Iroh put a gentle hand on Naruto's shoulder and said, "This is Naruto, and know he not my servant, I have adopted him as my son." Naruto looked up at the Fire Lord and then bowed down to Ozai in accordance with his adopted father's earlier instructions. It is an honor to meet you, Fire Lord Ozai. Did you honestly think that if you adopted this lowly commoner for a foreign land that you'd be allowed to still become Fire Lord when your real son was killed? Ozai asked, squinting his eyes as he turned to face Iroh. Naturally, Iroh placed a comforting hand on Naruto's shoulder before turning to face his brother. Naruto lowered his head as though in embarrassment at the fact that he was not Iroh's biological son and never could be. Iroh said, I had no such thought when I adopted Naruto, as I adopted Naruto because I generally care for him greatly. This made Naruto smile because he was overjoyed to learn that Iroh loved him. This caused Ozai to snicker. Regardless of your feelings towards this vagabond, I will not allow you to dirty our noble family by allowing some trash that you picked off the street enter our family. Naruto was terrified of what would happen after hearing this, and his fears of being despised in the Fire Nation, as he had been in Konoha, started to come back. Thankfully, Iroh would not allow this to occur. He stated, there is no law that prevents me from adopting Naruto, Ozai, and referred to his brother by his given name rather than Fire Lord. The flames surrounding him grew larger and more intense as Ozai became enraged at his brother's disobedience. The angry words, I'm the Fire Lord and my word is law, from Ozai made Naruto start to worry about what would happen next, but he kept his composure and remained motionless. If you allow me to adopt Naruto as a member of our family and as my son, then I will not challenge you for the throne, Iroh said calmly after narrowing his eyes. Ozai yelled, you would dare challenge me, your Fire Lord and my claim to the throne along with our father's will, as the flames surrounding him erupted in equal fury. Naruto grew increasingly terrified of what Ozai would do upon witnessing this, but Iroh reassured him that everything would be alright by placing a comforting hand on him while he continued to look at Ozai. Naturally, this reassured Naruto, who remained motionless. Iroh then said, it is my right, as I was originally to be next in line, with a composed expression. The two brothers engaged in a struggle of wills as Ozai glared at his elder brother and Iroh looked at Ozai calmly but intensely. Ozai started to consider his options. He was aware that, as the older brother, Iroh had every right to challenge him for the throne in Agni Kai. In addition to the fact that Iroh had an entire army and armada that were loyal to him and were located just outside the capital, he was aware that Iroh was the only one who could challenge and possibly defeat him in terms of firebending abilities. Because the other Fire Nation's armies were engaged in combat in the Earth Kingdom, Iroh could easily have his army attack the capital and seize the throne by force if he so desired. The forces stationed at the capital that were loyal to him, Ozai, would have no chance of defeating Iroh's seasoned and experienced army. Additionally, Iroh was still a very well-liked general in the army despite his shame at not capturing Ba Sing Se. As a result, many soldiers stationed at the capital would probably support Iroh if he wanted to seize the throne by force. The only thing he would need to do to secure his position as Fire Lord would be to allow Iroh to adopt Naruto into their family, as Iroh would not challenge him for the throne. As Ozai calmed down and sat back down, he scoffed, very well, you can have him. He felt that letting a commoner into the royal family was a small price to pay for securing his throne, and he also thought that he could always use Naruto as leverage against his brother in the event that Iroh ever caused him problems. Iroh grinned when he heard Ozai's response, but Naruto stayed silent and kept his head down to hide his face. After the adoption issue was resolved, Ozai brushed Iroh away without even glancing at Naruto. Iroh dismissed the royal procession after they left the room, stating that they were unnecessary. He then knelt down beside Naruto, recognizing that something was amiss with his recently adopted son. Naruto, what's wrong? You're not yourself. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have to give up being Fire Lord, Naruto said, keeping his mouth shut because he thought it was his fault that his adopted father wasn't Fire Lord. Naruto, please listen to me. I do not care about being Fire Lord and I never have. To me, having you with me and being able to adopt you as my son is worth far more to me than ever being Fire Lord, Iroh said, lifting up Naruto's chin to reveal his face. Naruto questioned, really, you're not angry at me? Iroh grinned and said, really, which made Naruto smile too. He then gave Iron a hug in return, and Naruto said yes when he asked if he wanted to show him around the palace or not. After exploring the palace for several hours, Naruto and Iroh came upon Zuko, Iroh's young nephew, in the expansive open garden, who was feeding turtle ducks by themselves at the garden pond. Naturally, Naruto thought they were extremely odd. Even though he had read about them in the books Iroh had assigned him to read, seeing them was alien. When Iroh called out to his nephew, he turned and saw him and Naruto approaching. Zuko then called out to his uncle, who approached him, greeted him, and gave him a hug, to which Iroh returned the embrace. After releasing his uncle, Zuko turned to face Naruto with interest before turning back to face his uncle and asking, "Uncle, who is he?" "Zuko, I would like you to meet Naruto, who I've adopted and will be your cousin from now on," Iroh said, bending down to address Zuko. Naturally, Zuko was taken aback by this. He then introduced himself and said, "Hello," to Naruto, to which Naruto reluctantly accepted his hands. Iroh naturally smiled when he saw this, and he then asked Zuko where his mother was so he could introduce Naruto to her. In response to Iroh's question, Zuko displayed a distressed expression before admitting he had no idea and explaining how she vanished the same evening that Fire Lord Azulon unexpectedly passed away. Iroh scowled when he heard this because he was aware of Ursa's deep affection for Zuko and Azula and that she would only leave them under duress. Given the circumstances, including the fact that she vanished the night his father died and that Ozai was proclaimed the next Fire Lord without waiting for his return, Iron found this to be all too coincidental and made the decision to look into it later. For the next hour or so, Iroh, Naruto, and Zuko discussed the war events in Iroh. Naruto then discussed the elemental continent, or more specifically, Konoha, telling Zuko how it was both different and similar to the other four great nations. In response, Naruto inquired about various aspects of Fire Nation, particularly the animals, which he found amusing but fascinating because they resembled a hybrid of two different animals from his home country. For example, the turtle ducks resembled a hybrid of a regular duck and a turtle. Azula, Mai, and Ty Lee soon joined the three. They were interested in learning more about Naruto and the topic of conversation between the three of them after observing Iroh and Naruto sitting and conversing with Zuko. "Welcome back, Uncle," was Azula's greeting as she and Mai approached Iroh and the others. Iroh turned to his young niece and said, "Ah, Azula, my girl, it's so good to see you. Look how much you have grown. You'll certainly become a lovely girl when you get older," Iroh said. "Ah, and these must also be your friends Mai and Ty Lee who have heard about," he said after noticing Mai and Ty Lee. Ty Lee said, "Nice to meet you." "Hello," Mai answered. Gazing at Naruto, Azula asked, "Uncle, who is this?" "Ah, this is Naruto, who is from a foreign land called the Elemental Continent, which is a land far from here, and I have adopted him and he will be your new cousin. Funny enough as well, Naruto's home country is called Fire Country," responded Iroh. Naturally, Azula raised an eyebrow in interest at this, but Ty Lee cut her off before she could ask him, saying, "That is so cool." This intrigued Mai as well, since she had never seen anyone with blonde hair before and it was obvious that Naruto was from a distant land. Azula asked, did father approve of this? Because she thought it was odd that her father would let a foreign commoner live with them. Iroh's response, "Yes he did," shocked Azula, who later intended to question her father about why he permitted this. "What are those markings on your face?" Mai inquired as she examined Naruto's face more closely and noticed his unusual whisker-shaped birthmarks. "Why are there birthmarks?" Naruto answered. "Oh, they're just funny looking," Mai retorted. Ty Lee smiled and said, "I think they make you look cute." Naruto blushed because, in his entire life, no one had ever told him he looked cute. Iroh spent the next few minutes discussing the elemental continent and how, like here, they had a variety of fighting arts. However, they were made of chakra and could perform multiple functions, unlike the four great nations. There was a limit to what the shinobi of the elemental continent could do because they were unable to bend the actual elements like benders could. Additionally, they could no longer perform jutsu if their chakra ran out. Azula turned to face Naruto after raising an eyebrow in curiosity, asking, "And can you do any of these techniques that uncle mentioned?" "Only the basics, which are taught at the academy," answered Naruto. "I can't do any of the elemental ninjutsus that father said." Naturally, Azula and Zuko thought it odd that a boy they had just met and who had no blood connection to their uncle was referring to him as father, but they moved past it. Zuko then inquired about the type of jutsu he was capable of. Naruto turned to his adopted father, who nodded and told him he could. Naruto then got up and used a henge transformation to transform himself into an exact replica of his adopted father, Iroh. The children were stunned because they had never witnessed anything like Naruto's transformation into an exact replica of Iroh. Ty Lee exclaimed, "Wow, that is so cool!" With excitement, even Azula, Mai, and Zuko were taken aback and impressed by that henge. "Can you change just into people or can you change into animals as well?" Zuko asked after Naruto had returned to his normal state. "I can change into a lot of things, like people, animals or objects, although it is difficult to keep up under long periods of time and I have to constantly release a flow of chakra while mentally maintaining the form," Naruto replied. Since most people would ignore him and only laugh at him when he made a mistake or when they were about to attack him, he enjoyed the attention he received from Zuko and the others. Tai Li exclaimed, "What else can you do?" Naruto responded, "Well, I can also do this," and then, using the Kawarimi no Jutsu, body replacement technique, he changed himself into a stone statue of a dragon that was close by. The children were obviously shocked by this, but Iroh stayed composed because Naruto had shown him all of this earlier on their journey to the Fire Nation, and he had read about shinobi in some of the books and scrolls he had purchased in the Elemental Continent. Naturally, the children were once again in disbelief when Naruto vanished and a stone dragon materialized where he had been just a moment before. Where did he go? A startled Tai Li asked as she and the other searched for Naruto. When he replaced himself with the stone dragon statue, everyone was distracted, so Naruto used Kakuramino no Jutsu, cloak of invisibility technique, to blend in with the tree trunk and hide from them. "Looking for me?" he asked as he emerged from one of the three trunks. Even Azula had to concede that it was impressive because she had never seen anything like those techniques before. "Wow, that's amazing!" exclaimed Tai Li, and Zuko and Mai nodded in comprehension. Azula wanted to learn as much as she could about Naruto's skills and what the people of his land could do, so she said, "Pretty impressive, but is that all they teach you there?" "That's all the jutsu I know, although we're also trained in hand-to-hand fighting, along with throwing weapons and how to fight with them in close quarters as well as in speed and agility," replied Naruto. When Mai and Tai Li heard this, they became curious, and Azula made the decision to ask a question she had. "Is it possible for us to learn the skills that you have?" Naturally, Naruto expected this kind of question, but he hadn't anticipated it coming from Azula. Instead, he had assumed it would come from her father, Fire Lord Ozai, or a high-ranking general like his adopted father Iroh. Naruto said, "No you can't," which made Azula frown and narrow her eyes. "And why not?" asked an irritated Azula, who thought that if a commoner like Naruto could accomplish things that she couldn't, then even these simple skills would be very helpful in combat, along with information gathering and assassination. Naruto retorted, "It's because only people from my land can use them for some reason." Azula, who didn't trust Naruto, questioned, "And how can you be so sure of that?" "Because Dad asked me to teach him how to use them as well as some of the crew on the ship we were on, but none of them could do it," replied Naruto. Iroh said, "I'm afraid it is true, Azula, but in actuality, he was lying when he instructed Naruto to ask anyone who asked if he could teach them his techniques." Given the similarities between the bending arts and the shinobi arts, Iroh had a suspicion. Other people outside of Naruto's home country might be able to learn it. However, Iroh wanted to ensure that his brother and the Fire Nation military officials thought it was impossible. He was aware that if Naruto taught these fundamental abilities, Ozai would seize him and make him instruct others. In addition, he was aware that his brother would use these abilities to advance the war and subjugate the other countries. In order to gain more shinobi skills and increase his power, he would also send troops to conquer the Elemental Continent. For this reason, he also intended to make sure that he did not tell Ozai everything in his written report and to lie in many of its sections, giving the impression that he, Iroh, was not very knowledgeable about the shinobi world, which was kind of turn. At the same time, they gave the impression that shinobi were not a threat to the Fire Nation and that they were strong enough that trying to defeat them would be too much work. Despite this, Iroh knew that his brother would eventually look toward the Elemental Continent because he knew that his brother wouldn't be content until he had control over the entire world. However, if something could eventually be done to put an end to this senseless conflict and stop another one from starting, that would at least be the case. Azula decided to practice her fire bending abilities after learning that she was unlikely to be able to perform any ninjutsu. She was irritated because she disliked being staged by others. Mai and Tai Li trailed behind her, but not before they bid farewell to Iroh, Zuko, and Naruto. However, when Mai bid farewell to Zuko, she blushed a little, which Iroh noticed and grinned, and he also saw Zuko blush a little when she bid him farewell. Iroh laughed and said, "Ah, to be young again." Naruto was obviously perplexed by this statement because he had witnessed Zuko and Mai blush a little when they said goodbye to each other, but he didn't know why. "What do you mean by that, Dad? Why were Mai and Zuko blushing when they said goodbye to one another?" replied Naruto. Iroh grinned knowingly and said, "Ah, you understand later on, Naruto, with you get a little older and met a special young lady yourself." "Huh?" asked Naruto, who chose to ignore the fact that he was not receiving his adopted father at all. Iroh then proposed that since the day was so pleasant, the three of them leave the palace and take a stroll through Caldera City to give Naruto a better look at the Fire Nation and enjoy a delicious meal outside. Naturally, both boys agreed because Naruto was excited to see more of the Fire Nation, his new home, and more importantly, to find a place where they could make ramen, assuming they had it. On the other hand, Zuko had found it intriguing because, despite his refusal to acknowledge it, he was curious to find out more about Naruto and his homeland. Apart from his mother, he didn't really have any friends or someone to talk to, so he did enjoy the company of his uncle and Naruto. After reaching an agreement, the three of them left together, with Naruto, the former Konoha outcast, starting a new life as a prince of the Fire Nation. The Fire Nation's royal family palace. As the early morning sun shone through the open balcony of his bedroom, Naruto was currently dozing off in a large silk bed in a large room within the royal family of the Fire Nation's palace. The sun's rays struck Naruto's closed eyes, causing him to gradually awaken. When Naruto awoke, he sat up and showed off his crimson royal red bed robes, which were worn by every member of the royal family before bed. He yawned loudly as he woke up and then peered out the open balcony doorway to watch the sun rise over Royal Caldera City. The clear, bright morning sky made it clear that the day would be lovely. Naruto heard the big double doors to his bedroom, which were right in front of his bed, open after gazing out at the city. When he turned to face them, he saw a young girl walking in. After Naruto was formally adopted by Iroh and became a member of the royal family, the girl in question was assigned to him as his personal servant. A member of the royal family would typically have 4 or 5 servants, but according to Ozai, Naruto would only have one because he was not born with royal status. Naturally, Naruto didn't care about this because he could have easily done just as well without a servant. The girl in question, Min, was 18 years old, medium in height, slender, and had a sufficiently attractive face. She wore the typical attire of royal court servants, had dark brown hair tied up in a bun, and light gray eyes. Most people thought it was a great honor that Min's family had served the royal family for more than 5 generations. Her father headed the Fire Lord's personal staff of servants, her mother worked as a royal cook in the royal kitchen, and her younger sister cleaned the palace. When Naruto first met Min, she was kind enough to help him get new clothes for when he went out. She also showed him how to call for her or other servants when he needed something, as well as other areas of the palace that he was unaware of to prevent him from getting lost. Like most members of the royal family, Min naturally bowed on her knees when he was introduced to her and referred to him as Prince Naruto, or Your Highness. When Naruto attempted to persuade her to simply call him Naruto, the young adolescent girl was obviously appalled. It wasn't until much later that Iroh told Naruto that servants were not permitted to speak to members of the royal family in such a familiar way and that doing so would result in harsh punishment. Naturally, Naruto apologized to Min after learning of this and told her that he was unaware. Eventually, however, he was successful in persuading Min to call him Naruto whenever they were by themselves and no one else could hear, but would address him as His Highness, or Prince Naruto, in public. Naruto knew that things would not be easy for him, so it was not surprising that things had not been completely easy for him for the 6 months since he arrived in the Fire Nation. Naruto was introduced to many of the various noble families that resided in the royal Caldera City after he was formally adopted as Iroh's son. While some nobles generally treated Naruto with kindness and respect, many others did not. He quickly discovered that many of the more traditional and noble families disliked him, despite the fact that he was treated with respect by every nobleman he encountered. Some of them were merely envious of Naruto joining the royal family, while others felt that a foreign commoner had no right to be made a prince of the Fire Nation. Later on, Naruto discovered that some of the other families who were friendly with him were only doing so in an effort to rise in the Fire Nation's social standing. Additionally, Naruto struggled to learn all of the Fire Nation's major historical events as well as all of the other customs that Iroh had not yet taught him because Iroh was aware of how easily people could take advantage of or make fun of Naruto for not knowing these things. Even though all of these things were difficult for Naruto, none were more difficult than his interactions with Fire Lord Ozai, his recently adopted uncle, who made it his personal goal to disparage, insult, and make fun of both Iroh and Naruto whenever he had the chance, especially in public. Even though both Iroh and Naruto were able to dismiss or laugh off Ozai's comments, some of them did in fact hurt Naruto, and Iroh would later need to speak with him to reassure him that the statements were false. However, despite all of this, Naruto did experience some positive things. For example, he made friends in the Fire Nation. These friends were Mai, Tai Li, and Zuko, his new cousin. In the 6 months since his arrival, Naruto has frequently played or conversed with one of his new pals. While Mai and Tai Li typically hung with Azula, he would spend most of his time with Zuko because, prior to meeting each other, neither boy had many friends. Despite the fact that Zuko and Naruto had many different traits, Zuko could be strict, domineering, and controlling due to his upbringing as Fire Nation royalty. He also detested the idea of doing things with people he thought were beneath him. Like his adopted father in some ways, Naruto was more laid back, passive, and enjoyed having fun. He also didn't mind doing menial tasks for himself or the servants. Despite their differences, The two boys had a lot in common, including a similar past. Both Zuko and Naruto had difficult upbringings. Zuko's father treated him with contempt and even disgust because he was not a natural prodigy like his sister Azula and frequently made mistakes, while Naruto was hated and attacked by his former homeland. Both boys had a similar desire to succeed and gain recognition from others. In Konoha, Naruto had aspired to become Hokage in order to gain recognition. His desire for recognition, however, had somewhat changed after joining the Fire Nation's royal family. While he was acknowledged by others, it was not for the reasons he desired. Naruto didn't want to be known as the unfortunate commoner who was fortunate enough to be adopted by the well-known Dragon of the West, even though he was aware that most people only recognized him because he was adopted by Iroh. In order to be recognized as someone other than Iroh's adopted son, Naruto wanted to break free from the enormous shadow that his adoptive father had cast over him. This is not to say that Naruto is ungrateful or ashamed of Iroh. Zuko shared Naruto's desire to be accepted by his father, win his affection, and demonstrate his worth to him. Both Naruto and Zuko had a strong will to succeed, which they used to overcome personal challenges and never give up on achieving their own objectives. The two boys even firmly believed that it was the royal family's responsibility to defend and assist their country's citizens and that people should not be seen as disposable or worthless. Even when Zuko's father ignored him in favor of Azula or when he made a mistake that infuriated his Ozai, the two boys stood by each other. Naruto would make jokes or give Zuko a motivational speech to lift his spirits. In exchange, Zuko would defend Naruto whenever someone made fun of him or support him whenever he tried to use firebending, since despite Naruto's tremendous efforts over the last few months, he had not demonstrated any talent for the ability. Additionally, Naruto enjoys positive relationships with Ty Lee and Mai. Ty Lee was silly and enjoyed having fun, just like Naruto and Ty Lee discovered they had a lot in common. In order to compete with one another, they frequently even used their innate agility and acrobatic abilities to run and jump through the palace's expansive gardens and their trees, as well as up onto the roofs of the palaces. Even their hand-to hand-fighting techniques improved significantly as a result of their training together, and Naruto was even able to hold his own against Ty Lee for a while. Mai, on the other hand, was a little hard to get along with because she was emotionally distant from most people, frequently found by herself, and kept quiet. Naturally, Naruto made several attempts to become friends with Mai, but she consistently rejected him. It wasn't until he happened to run into her while hurling some small knives at a wall that he was able to make some headway. Naruto made another attempt to speak with her when he saw her hurling her knives at the wall. Mai initially ignored him, but Naruto persisted and eventually challenged her to a knife-throwing competition. Being challenged naturally piqued Mai's interest, and the two of them engaged in a competition to see who could shoot better. Naturally, Mai prevailed. However, after Naruto accomplished his objective, Mai offered to give him some throwing advice and, if he was interested, a rematch. Naturally, Naruto agreed, and the two of them would practice throwing 4 times a week together. They both had a great time and significantly improved their throwing and aiming abilities. However, Naruto did not get along with his other cousin Azula, despite making friends with Zuko, Mai, and Ty Lee. Naturally, Naruto made an effort to make friends with Azula. At first, it appeared that they were getting along, but then Naruto overheard Azula telling Ty Lee and Mai that she didn't even like him and that she intended to use his abilities to accomplish her goals. After learning this, Naruto decided to play a number of practical jokes to vent his anger at Azula because he was naturally offended and angry by what she had said. These practical jokes included things like filling balloons with water and hurling them at Azula while she was outdoors from the roof. Others included Naruto adding red dye to her bubble bath, which caused her skin to turn completely red when she emerged from the bath and looked in the mirror. During one of his walks outside the capital with his adopted father, Naruto discovered some mayapple plants and stole some. This was another practical joke. Naruto's father taught him a lot about plants from his walks, though he frequently had to confirm some of the information because Iroh frequently confused different plants. Iroh informed Naruto that if the mayapple plants are ground up and consumed in small quantities, they can cause severe diarrhea. Naturally, without Azula's knowledge, Naruto stole some of the plant's leaves, ground them up, and sprinkled them on her food. For a few days, Azula was unable to leave the bathroom and spent most of her time there. Despite all of these antics and the fact that Naruto was the culprit, neither she nor anyone else could ever prove that Naruto was responsible, so he could never be punished. She was aware that she couldn't threaten him or have Naruto punished because, aside from her father and Iroh, Naruto was the only person who wasn't afraid of her. Knowing he couldn't fight back, Azula retaliated against Naruto by making fun of him and making sarcastic remarks about him in public. She also took it upon herself to ridicule Naruto's inability to firebend, claiming that it demonstrated that he was not a legitimate member of the royal family. In an attempt to demonstrate her superiority over Naruto, she even made sure to demonstrate her own firebending prowess in front of him. Additionally, she made sure that Mai and Tai Li could only spend a restricted amount of time with Naruto in secret. Naturally, this upset Naruto because he was aware of Azula's actions and knew that Tai Li and Mai were only friends with Azula because they were terrified of her and what she might do to them, although Tai Li may have thought Azula was her friend. Even so, Naruto found that his life in the Fire Nation was far better than his life in Konoha, particularly when he was with his adopted distant Iroh, with whom he was already developing a strong bond. Naruto spent a lot of time playing Pai Sho with his new father during his 6 months in the Fire Nation, where he was gradually getting better. Iroh even persuaded Naruto to take up an instrument, convincing him to begin learning how to play the flute. He even began teaching Naruto how to make tea, and while he was gradually getting better, he was still far from being as skilled as his father, at least not yet. Iroh also tried teaching Naruto how to firebend in the 6 months since he had come to the Fire Nation, but to the young boy's dismay, he had demonstrated little to no skill in this area. Fortunately, though, Iroh gave Naruto encouragement, telling him that they would persevere and that there was still hope. "Good morning, Prince Naruto. I hope you slept well," Min said as she swiftly bowed respectfully to Naruto upon entering the room. After getting out of bed and stretching, Naruto said, "Yeah, I did, thanks." He then went to the bathroom to wash up, where Min started making his bed and laying out new clothes for Naruto to wear that day. He then left the room to give Naruto some privacy so he could get his breakfast and change after using the restroom. After cleaning and washing for a while, Naruto emerged from his private bathroom and proceeded to his bed, where Min had left his clothes. 1. Naruto had just finished getting dressed when there was a knock on his door. Min said, "Enter," and then reappeared carrying a breakfast tray that contained a bowl of egg fried rice, bread, fruit, and freshly squeezed juice. After that, Min placed the tray on a little table so Naruto could eat his breakfast. Before Min left the room, Naruto thanked her and instructed her to thank her mother for preparing breakfast. Min naturally nodded and promised Naruto that she would. Naturally, Naruto was well liked by the royal palace staff because, like them, he was a member of the royal family despite not having royal ancestry. In contrast to most nobles or high-ranking officials, he showed respect for the servants and avoided speaking down to them. He frequently assisted the servants who struggled with specific tasks they were given, such as a young servant boy who was struggling to carry a large load of laundry to the restroom. Naturally, Naruto went over to assist the boy and carry some of the load to the restroom. Naruto even defended certain servants when they were insulted by high-ranking officials or nobles or falsely accused of something. He obviously did not gain many points with the upper class as a result, but he did gain a lot of support from the servant class. Since Min mother was the only cook in the entire royal palace who could make a decent bowl of ramena nearly as good as Ichiraku ramen, which he ate almost daily back in Konoha, Naruto and Min mother got along particularly well. After finishing his egg fried rice, Naruto carried the tray outside to the balcony and placed it on the big stone balustrade that prevented him from falling off. After that, Naruto picked up the bowl of fruit and set it on a big, thick branch of a big tree that stood next to the balcony. The tree had a tiny house on it that was about the size of a big dollhouse. When Naruto yelled, "Breakfast time!" after setting the fruit bowl on the thick branch in front of the tiny house, a tiny monkey with a tiny red and white robe around its neck rushed out and headed for the bowl. 2. When Naruto saw the monkey, he gave his little friend a kind smile and gave the monkey a gentle pat on the head. After saying, "Hey, Sha Oz, 3, how are you today?" the small monkey exclaimed, "Eek," and grinned up at Naruto before removing a big grape from the bowl and biting into it. When Naruto saw this, he couldn't contain his smile and gave his small friend a gentle pat on the head. 2 months after arriving in the Fire Nation, Naruto discovered Sha Oz at an animal stand while strolling through Harbor City with his father. Naruto had seen the animal stand out of the corner of his eye as they strolled through the city, and when he turned to look at it, he saw Sha Oz sitting in his cage, appearing sick and as though it had given up on life. When Naruto saw the poor thing, he felt sorry for him and asked his father to buy it for him. Iroh was first hesitant to purchase the small monkey, but after observing his son's worried expression and the animal's state, he too felt sorry for it and made the decision. When the salesman learned that Iroh and Naruto wanted to purchase Sha Oz, he attempted to persuade them that another of his animals would be preferable because he thought Sha Oz wouldn't last very long. However, the salesman quickly agreed when Iroh insisted that he would only accept Sha Oz. After purchasing Sha Oz, Naruto and Iroh promptly returned him to the palace, where they restored his health. However, after he recovered sufficiently, the young monkey continued to attempt to flee from both Naruto and Iroh, indicating that he was terrified of them and had a negative encounter with humans. Eventually, though, after many weeks, Naruto gained Shao-Ozi's trust, after which Iroh suggested Shao-Ozi's name, where when the little monkey heard it he immediately liked it. After Shao-Ozi became his official new friend, Naruto started taking him everywhere he went. It became common to see Shao-Ozi on Naruto's shoulder, and when Shao-Ozi was by himself, everyone knew that Naruto was nearby. After earning Shao-Ozi's trust, Naruto discovered that he was a very smart monkey who could carry out tasks on his own and comprehend a lot of what Naruto was saying. Given how much mischief he occasionally gets up to, Zuko naturally thought that Naruto's monkey was a perfect fit for his new cousin when he later introduced him to his other friends. The majority of the time, Zuko paid little attention to Shao-Ozi. However, on occasion, Zuko showed Shao-Ozi a great deal of kindness, petting his head and occasionally giving him a piece of food. On a few occasions, Zuko even acknowledged that he thought Shao-Ozi was cute. Naturally, Mai didn't give Shao-Ozi much attention either, but eventually, just like Naruto, the small monkey wormed his way through Mai's thick outer shell. In front of Mai, Shao-Ozi would perform small tricks that Naruto had taught him, which would actually cause her to smile a little. Naturally, this meant that Shao-Ozi was the only one of the three individuals who could make Mai smile, the other two being Zuko and Naruto. Naturally, Ty Lee loved Shao-Ozi. When she first saw him, she let out a high-pitched squeal, grabbed hold of him, and almost killed the poor little monkey by squeezing him. Ty Lee loved to watch and participate in the small acrobatic tricks that Naruto and Shao-Ozi practiced after he eventually calmed Ty Lee down, saving the life of his little friend. Because of the amount of attention she would give him and the way she would spoil him with sweet berries, Ty Lee also swiftly became Shao-Ozi's favorite person, second only to Naruto. Despite their initial uncomfortable encounter, the three of them would also have fun having little races as they jumped through the trees in and around the palace, where Shao-Ozi would normally win, due to his small size, where he could running much faster and take shortcuts, that Ty Lee and Naruto couldn't. Additionally, Iroh had a good relationship with Shao-Ozi, a small monkey who frequently visited Iroh for play or treats when he was unable to interact with Naruto. When either or both of them were around, Shao-Ozi would hide inside Naruto's shirt until they left. Azula and Ozai were the only real people that he didn't get along with because they both frightened the little monkey. Shao-Ozi was terrified of both of them because, as Naruto could attest, Ozai exuded a cold, cruel aura that made him seem about as amiable as two-headed rat viper. In contrast, Azula tried to use Shao-Ozi, also known as the overgrown rat, as a target practice for her firebending. Fortunately, Naruto was able to stop Shao-Ozi from doing this, and Shao-Ozi retaliated against Azula by sneaking into her room and sprinkling inching powder inside her clothing. Azula spent the majority of the morning scratching herself until she changed and cleaned herself. However, the poor little monkey was still terrified of Azula even after this, especially when she gave him a direct look. Following the completion of breakfast by both Naruto and Shao-Ozi, Min knocked on the door once more and went inside to retrieve Naruto's dishes. She then informed Naruto that she had received a message from his father stating that he would meet Naruto in the courtyards. After that, they would travel to their exclusive training area outside the capital, which was a forest, where they would practice their Naruto firebending techniques. Before Min left with the dishes, Naruto thanked her and nodded in understanding. He then called Shao-Ozi to come over to him, who immediately leapt off his branch, ran to his master, climbed up onto his shoulder, and sat on it. Two Imperial Firebenders, Naruto's personal bodyguards, joined him as soon as he left his room. Typically, a member of the royal family would have about a dozen Imperial Firebenders accompany them when they left the palace or the capital. However, Ozai chose to give Naruto just two because he wasn't a true member of the royal family. Since Naruto disliked the idea of having a dozen armored men around him all the time, this obviously worked out well for him. In addition, his father Iroh had managed to have the guards be former soldiers who had defended him during the war. As a result, Iroh was confident that he could rely on the men to keep Naruto safe and ensure that Ozai hadn't assigned any loyalists to spy on both Naruto and him. Naturally, Naruto grew close to both of his middle-aged guards, Hu and Zhang, who had devotedly supported and respected his father Iroh during the conflict. Alongside Iroh, both men were highly skilled firebenders who had participated in numerous battles. Naturally, the two men treated Naruto with great courtesy and grew close to the young blonde over the course of the 6 months that he had been in the Fire Nation. Naturally, Naruto enjoyed the company of both of his guards, and he thought Zhang was very funny. He would crack many good jokes and even cheer Naruto up when he was feeling low after failing his firebending training, which was all the time. Who, on the other hand, was a very serious man who had fought the Earth Kingdom in numerous bloody battles and had a large scar that extended down his left eye. Despite his somewhat menacing appearance, the general was amiable and respectful, and because of his extensive military experience, he was just as wise as Iroh. Naturally, Naruto loved hearing some of Who's war stories, and he frequently dreamed of becoming a great firebender like his adopted father. After a short while, Naruto and his two guards showed up to meet Iroh and his guards in the courtyard. After exchanging greetings with the company, they left the palace and made their way outside the capital into a sizable clearing where Iroh and Naruto received their training. Naturally, the guards maintained a safe distance from the clearing to allow Iroh and Naruto to train in secret while also ensuring that no one could spy on them. Iroh lit a small fire after entering their training clearing area, then got out a small kettle, a few teacups, and a small bag of tea ingredients and started making tea. Naruto was perplexed by this since he had anticipated training akin to what they had been doing for the previous few months. "Hey Dad, what are you doing? I thought we were doing some training today. We don't usually have tea till afternoon or evening," said Naruto. "Tea can be had at any time, Naruto. That's the wonderful thing about it, and it can help calm the mind and focus it, which is what we're trying to do today. As if we help calm your mind and focus it, I believe it can help with your firebending," Iroh said. Naruto asked, "But what if I simply can't bend? What if I'm just talentless like Azula and everyone back at Konoha used to say to me? What if you're just wasting your time with me?" After years of being devalued by others, he occasionally felt low about himself, especially when he was performing poorly at something. Iroh's comforting smile lifted Naruto's spirits. "Nonsense, Naruto. You've talent deep inside of you, as no one is born without talent." Iroh finished preparing jasmine tea, which was intended to help Naruto relax after a short while. Naruto, who had learned the meditation position from Iroh, placed himself in it after finishing his tea, along with Shao Ozi, who also took a small sip of tea with his master. Naturally, Naruto found meditation difficult, but fortunately, Iroh was a patient man and teacher who eventually taught Naruto how to focus and calm his mind. He found that giving Naruto a soothing beverage, like jasmine tea, was particularly beneficial when teaching him to do this. After falling into his meditation position, Naruto started to concentrate. Not much happened to him for the first few minutes, but eventually something did. Enter the mindscape of Naruto. Naruto was meditating when all of a sudden he was in a huge, dark tunnel that was completely submerged in water up to his ankles. As he peered around the dimly lit tunnel, Naruto exclaimed, "Where the hell am I?" Naruto began to move forward to see where the tunnel ended, realizing that standing around would not provide him with any answers. After a few minutes, Naruto arrived at the tunnel's end and entered a spacious room with a huge cage at the other end. Between the two cage doors was a large paper seal that served as a lock. Naruto made the decision to look into it more and proceeded to the cage, which was once just a short distance away. He stopped abruptly when he saw two enormous, glowing red eyes open wide, followed by a huge mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. Naruto recognized the creature at that moment because he had seen images of it in books he had read while attending the academy. "Kyuubi," was a soft, startled mutter that Naruto made since he had always been told that the Kyuubi had been killed by the Yondaime Hokage. In a dark, menacing voice that would have made many courageous men shudder in terror, the Kyuubi said, "So my tenant has finally graced me with his presence." However, Naruto displayed no such behavior and simply gazed at the Kyuubi. When the Kyuubi noticed that Naruto was not afraid of him, he said with amusement, "Impressive, you've some courage as you don't seem afraid of me, but then again I would nothing less from that man's son." Naruto demanded, "Where am I? How are you alive? As the Yondaime Hokage was said to have killed you years ago? And what do you mean by his son? Do you mean that you know who my birth father is?" As he gazed at the Kyuubi, who was obviously aware of information he was curious about. The Kyuubi found it amusing that Naruto didn't even know who his parents were. "Hey, so you don't know, do you?" he asked. Naruto demanded, "Tell me," because he was in search of answers. Kyuubi grinned slightly at Naruto, who was staring at him angrily, and said, "Fine, since I find you so amusing. We're currently inside a seal that was placed on you by your wretched father the Yondaime Hokage, as despite what you have been told he didn't kill me, as I cannot be killed. The Yondaime Hokage could only seal me away, where when you were born, he sealed me into you." Naruto was shocked to hear this and exclaimed, "The Yondaime Hokage is my father and sealed you into me when I was born." The Kyuubi simply nodded. Everything about Naruto's life in Konoha suddenly made sense after he heard this, including the fact that everyone there detested him and referred to him as a monster or demon. For them, Naruto represented the demon that killed so many of their loved ones and almost destroyed Konoha. Given that his father was the one who implanted the Kyuubi in him and sentenced him to 9 years of hell, Naruto was unable to control his anger at what he had done. However, Naruto didn't care if he knew what would happen to him because, in his eyes, Iroh was his father, having taken him in and treated him like a son. The Yondaime, on the other hand, was merely a stranger who had implanted a demon in him at birth. Indeed, and he was the one who placed me into you, and your mother was also the previous host to me before you. Naruto said, wait, my mother was also just like me and had you placed into her, to which the Kyuubi simply nodded once more. But why? Because your village wanted to use my power to keep them strong, and the only way to do that was to place me into a human like you and have you use my immense power for their benefit. Naruto became enraged upon hearing this, feeling that Konoha had used both him and his mother in order to maintain its power. At the same time, the village made his life miserable and treated him like the plague for no fault of his own. Naruto questioned, but if you were sealed into my mother, why are you in me? As though the Kyuubi should have been in his mother or at the very least perished with her if what he said was accurate. Because on the day you were born, a man wearing an orang mask kidnapped your mother after she gave birth to you, since the man knew that when a female Jincha, Riki, gives birth the seal of their demon weakens, allowing said demon like myself to break free, said the Kyuubi. After he kidnapped your mother he used his powers to free me and place me under his control and had me attack your former village in the hopes of destroying it. But in the end your father the Yondaime Hokage freed me of the man's control and then later stopped me by sealing me into you. Naruto inquired, and what happened to my parents? I killed them. Kyuubi retorted. You what? Naruto exclaimed in disbelief. I killed them, but to be honest, they were already dying because your mother was slowly passing away and your father's technique had killed him. With no remorse at all for what he had done, the Kyuubi responded, since the process of extracting any Biju like myself from their host is so painful that they will die from it. When Naruto heard all of this, he glared at the Kyuubi with all the hate he could muster and directed it at the Kyuubi because, in addition to being one of the reasons he had such a miserable life, the creature had also killed both of his parents, leaving him an orphan. As instructed by his adoptive father Iroh, Naruto took a few deep breaths to relax after staring at the Kyuubi for a few minutes. Then, he turned back to face the Kyuubi and resumed his conversation. Who was the man in the mask who set you free? Since that man was the one who had freed the Kyuubi and essentially killed his mother, Naruto believed that man was the primary source of all of his suffering. The Kyuubi responded, his name is Uchiha Madara. Uchiha? Since one of his old classmates, Sasuke, was a member of the renowned clan of Konoha, Naruto thought, recalling the name of the clan. However, the Kyuubi continued speaking before Naruto could further consider the situation. He was the company founder of your former village and was the former rival of your Shodai Hokage, who he fought and lost to later on. So why are you telling me all this, as I doubt you're doing it out of the goodness of your heart, nor do I think that you're just doing because you like talking to me, said Naruto. Maybe you aren't as stupid as you look, the Kyuubi said with another amused smirk, which made Naruto give him a fierce glare. The reason that I'm telling you all this is because I'm going to give you a special gift. I don't want any gifts from you, not after everything you did to me, Naruto angrily said, narrowing his eyes at this. Are you certain you're not interested in what I have to offer? In particular, I can give you unique flames that are unlike any other in addition to the ability to firebend. How are you able to accomplish that? How are you going to teach me how to firebend when you're not even from here? Assuming it was some sort of trick and not trusting the Kyuubi, Naruto asked. You stupid kid, I'm a spirit, I've seen a lot, and I've lived longer than any living human. You humans in this land were taught the bending arts themselves by the great spirits of the spirit world. Instead of bending the actual elements as they do here, you shinobi from the elemental continent created your own fighting techniques that imitate the bending arts by using chakra. When Naruto heard this, he had to acknowledge that the Kyuubi's words made sense because he was a demon, which meant that he was essentially a spirit and could not die of old age. Despite this, he did not believe the creature because of all the suffering he caused and the fact that the Kyuubi was essentially evil and enjoyed wreaking havoc and destruction. Just what are you giving me? Asked Naruto because, despite his distaste and lack of trust for the Kyuubi, he would at least listen to what he had to say. The Kyuubi said, I offer you not only the ability to be able to do firebending, but also these flames. He then raised his paw, squeezed it through the bars, and revealed a tiny white flame to Naruto. I present to you the flames of Kajin, the Japanese god of fire, which are the frightful white flames of the heavens that are capable of matching the black flames of hell itself and burning as hot as the sun. The flames can smother ordinary fire and burn anything, but they only hurt people the user wants to burn or who harbor animosity toward the user. Because these flames are more controllable than others, they won't burn an ally or someone the user loves. Similar to the flames of hell, they can burn for 7 days and 7 nights and cannot be put out by water or any other conventional means. Normally, only the user can put them out. Because they are sacred, they are also very effective against demons like myself and other evil spirits. However, these flames will instantly burn anything in their path, in contrast to black flames, which burn slowly. Naruto's eyes widened slightly at the power of the flames, and for a brief moment, he was about to agree and take them, but he quickly stopped himself, recalling who he was currently dealing with. How can you use these flames if, as you claim, they are the flames of the heavens, given that you are a demon? With suspicion, Naruto asked. I cannot use them, as you say, since I am a demon, making them worthless to me, but since I'm also a spirit of fire, I can at least summon them and even pass them on to someone like you, said the Kyuubi. Naruto became even more suspicious of the Kyuubi after learning this, asking, so why are you giving me these flames? Particularly since they can be used against you, as you mentioned. It's because I've had nothing to do but sit in this cage and observe your worthless life for the last 9 years since your miserable father sealed me into you. Naturally, this has been incredibly boring and uninteresting. I will eventually break through this seal and eat you, but in the meantime, I will require entrainment of some kind. The Kyuubi responded, I've decided to add some spice by giving you these flames and seeing how you use them. Naruto was about to yell at the demon fox and tell him what he could do with his flames after learning that his life was nothing more than amusement. Author's note. I'm sure you can imagine what he would say. However, the fox spoke once more before Naruto could respond to the Kyuubi's offer. In reference to Naruto's desire to prove himself to others and demonstrate that he was more than most people believed, the Kyuubi said, if you take these flames, then not only can you make your new father proud, but also show all those other fools like the Fire Lord the power you possess. The Kyuubi saw Naruto gazing longingly at the white flame in the Kyuubi's, paw, just as he had suspected when he said this. Naturally, Kyuubi's plan was to have Naruto use the white flames for destruction because he had been observing Naruto for the previous 6 months and was aware of the great war that the Fire Nation was waging. Since he was also a creature of chaos and destruction, he was also well aware of the chaos and destruction that the Fire Nation was bringing throughout these lands, so he wanted to be involved, which is why he gave Naruto these flames. The Kyuubi of course knew of Naruto's longing for acceptance by those around him, much like the longing he had when he was in Konoha. He also knew that if he gave Naruto these flames, he would eventually use them in the war, whether it was by his own choice. Where he joined the army in the hopes of gaining acceptance in the Fire Nation, by fighting in the war and gaining fame or glory for himself, or be forced in the war by the Fire Lord, in the hopes of using the flames to the Fire Nation's advantage. Either of which was fine by the Kyuubi, since his plan was to have Naruto fight in the Fire Nation's war and use the white flames, which could only be used by those with a good heart, and have him cause more chaos and unbalance in the world. This of course would greatly amuse the Kyuubi, since he found the irony of using the flames of heaven to cause more chaos and distraction to the world extremely amusing. He also hoped that if Naruto entered this war on the Fire Nation's side, then the war would corrupt him and turn Naruto into something much more fitting for a being like himself, Kyuubi. I take them, was Naruto's abrupt statement after a few minutes. The Kyuubi smirked when he heard Naruto's response, then leaned forward slightly and allowed Naruto to transfer the flame to both of his hands before pressing them against his chest. Naturally, Naruto followed Kyuubi's instructions and felt the warm heat of the flames spread throughout his body as soon as he pressed them into his chest. He then noticed an aura, like white glow enveloping his body. The Kyuubi said, good, the flames are now within you, now you can do firebending and use white fire. Naruto was then told to leave since he had been tried, which he was more than happy to do because he had had enough of conversing with the miserable demon fox. Close Naruto's mindscape, Naruto felt his father shaking him and heard his voice calling to him as he emerged from his meditative state. When Naruto opened his eyes after fully emerging from his meditation state, he saw his father Iroh standing in front of him, looking worried and shaking him a little. Meanwhile, his small pet monkey, Shao-Zi, was pinching Naruto's cheeks in an attempt to wake his master because, like Iroh, he was concerned about Naruto. Naruto was still a little confused after emerging from his meditation state when Dad spoke to him. Naruto, thank goodness that you all right, Iroh said with obvious relief. I was calling out to you for several minutes, but you were in too deep a trance and didn't reply to me. I was beginning to worry. Oh, I'm fine, Dad. I'm just a little groggy. How long was I unconscious? Naruto inquired. I would say that after about 20 minutes, I started to worry even more when I noticed a white glow surrounding your body. What happened to you, Naruto? Naruto sighed at this point and spent the next 30 minutes telling his father what had transpired. Iroh frowned slightly when Naruto described everything that had transpired because he was suspicious of how the Kyuubi had given his adopted son these potent flames for mere amusement. He was even more worried about the fact that the Kyuubi was in his son in the first place because he had read about the demon in one of the books he had received during his trip to the elemental continent, so he was aware of the demon's strength and the devastation and chaos it had caused. His adopted son spoke up abruptly with a worried expression after noticing the frown on Iroh's face as he considered what he had just learned from Naruto. "Dad, you don't believe I'm a monster?" a worried Naruto asked, fearing that because he had the Kyuubi inside of him, his adopted father would despise him as most people in Konoha did. "Of course not, Naruto. Only a fool would think that you are a monster, as you're no more a monster than I'm," Iroh said, putting his hand on Naruto's shoulder and grinning kindly at him. "Eek!" was the cry of Shao-Zi, who agreed with Iroh. Naturally, this made Naruto happy that his father still loved him despite everything that was inside of him. He even gave Shao-Zi a head pat in appreciation for his support. "But we'll have to be more careful now," Iroh said gravely, drawing Naruto's attention. "Because people tend to fear and hate things they do not understand, there will be people like those in your old village who will not understand you and will be afraid of you. Additionally, there will be people like my brother who, if they discover that you have a strong demon like the Kyuubi sealed inside of you, will attempt to turn you into a living weapon and use the demon's power to end the war, just like your former village did." Since he wouldn't rule out his adopted uncle doing the same, Naruto nodded in agreement with his adoptive father upon hearing this. Iroh said, "But first we see if what the Kyuubi did worked and if you can firebend." Naruto nodded, assumed the basic stance his father had taught him, and took a deep breath as instructed. He then performed a quick jab to produce a ball of fire, but instead of producing the small fireball he had planned, a massive ball of white fire erupted from his fist, sending Naruto flying backwards because he was unprepared for the blast's immense power. Shao-Zi immediately let out a cry of terror and leapt off Naruto and onto the ground as he was blasted backwards by the force of the fireball he had created. Simultaneously, the enormous ball of white fire flew toward a big tree in front of Naruto. The ball of fire swiftly engulfed the tree, reducing it to ash in less than a minute while the white flames persisted. Iroh and Shao-Zi hurried to Naruto after the ball of white fire blasted him back. Naruto skidded a little on the ground before coming to a stop. "Naruto, are you okay?" Iroh asked as he assisted his adopted son in standing up after arriving at Naruto. Naruto said, "Ow, ow, I think so, it just caught me by surprise," as he stood up. Meanwhile, Shao-Zi leapt onto his master's back with a worried expression on his small face. The little monkey smiled when Naruto simply said, "Don't worry, Shao-Zi, I'm fine," and then he petted his friend's head once more to reassure him. Naruto looked at the tree in front of him after completing this and noticed that it had turned to ash in less than a minute. Did I do that?" Naruto asked, startled by what his flames had done. "Yes. It seems that your white flames are extremely powerful," Iroh remarked. She was equally taken aback by Naruto's white fire's strength and even more so when the flames persisted after the tree was reduced to ash. Following his recovery, Naruto and Iroh approached the still, burning white flames and picked them up. As the Kyuubi had assured Naruto, the flames did not harm his adoptive father. In fact, Iroh felt the warmth of the flames without getting burned by them. Iroh marveled at the tiny flame in his hand because it was unlike any other flame he had ever seen in his life. It was so lovely, seemed so pure and perfect, and could do no harm. Shao-Zi leapt off Naruto's shoulder and onto Iroh as soon as he saw the small white flame in Iroh's hand. He then climbed down Naruto's arm and approached the flame, bringing his small paw up to it, where it felt warm and did not burn or hurt him like it did for Naruto. Naruto, Iroh, and Shao-Zi gazed in awe at the white flames for the next few minutes before Iroh finally spoke. "These flames of yours are truly a wondrous thing, Naruto. I've never seen anything like them before in my many years, and they also seem to be extremely powerful, judging by what just happened. We'll have to train hard for you to be able to control them, as your white fire seemed to make even the most basic fire technique extremely powerful." Naturally, Naruto nodded in agreement because he knew his adopted father was correct. Iroh then dropped the white flame he had picked up and asked Naruto to try to put it out. According to what Kyuubi told Naruto, the flames would burn for 7 days and nights, and if they were left unattended, there was a good chance that someone would stumble upon them. It would attract a lot of attention to Iroh and Naruto if someone saw white flames burning continuously on the ground without burning themselves out, which was something they wanted to avoid, at least for the time being until they had their stories straight. After a few minutes and a lot of focus, Naruto was able to put out his white flames, although there was no success the first time. After putting out the flames, Iroh made the decision that they would celebrate Naruto's first successful firebending attempt and call it a day. However, they would keep the news to themselves, at least until Naruto improved his control over his new flames. After witnessing the power of white fire, Iroh also intended to set up a training program to help Naruto better control his new fire. He knew that if Naruto didn't learn to control them, they could pose a serious threat to both himself and those around him. However, that would wait until tomorrow, as today would be dedicated to commemorating Naruto's transformation into a firebender, which Iroh thought would surpass everyone, including himself. Even though Iroh believed this, he was not aware of how accurate it was because a new legend was about to be born, the legend of the White Fire Prince of the Fire Nashina, that would be known not only in the shinobi world of the elemental continent but also throughout the 4 great elemental kingdoms. With Naruto was currently rehearsing the firebending stances that he had learned from his adopted father, Iroh, in the center of the place garden. Most firebenders did not use the moves because they were not typical firebending stances. Iroh had learned an ancient firebending style known as the Dancing Dragons, which involved stances that did not require a firebender to use anger, hate, or rage to create their flames. Naruto has been diligently honing his firebending skills for the past month and a half in order to manage his white flames. Naruto struggled to control his flames because of their immense power. Each time he fired one, the recoil would blow him back. Iroh had devoted the majority of their training to helping Naruto fortify his positions so that he could both control the quantity of flames he fired and endure the recoil of doing so. He didn't need to use as much power in his fire as most firebenders would in order to achieve a particular outcome because of the strength of his flames. Naturally, Naruto's training was difficult because he had to practice his firebending almost every day, but he was gradually getting better at it. While Naruto continued his training, his pet monkey, Shao-Zi, sat on a nearby tree branch and continued to eat a small apple. In order to avoid prying eyes and prolong the concealment of his special flames, Naruto would typically train outside the palace. However, Naruto was compelled to remain in the palace to train after his adopted father Iroh was summoned to a war council meeting with the Fire Lord and his generals. Naruto was careful not to let out his flames as he continued to practice his moves in order to avoid drawing unwelcome attention. Naruto's father thought it would be best to keep his new flames a secret from everyone until he could fully control them, which is why he was keeping them that way. Because if people found out about his white fire, they would ask a lot of unwelcome questions that might lead to them learning that he had a Kyuubi sealed inside of him, at which point they would take him away from his father. Naruto was practicing his stances when he heard a voice and laugh he recognized from behind him. Well, if it isn't Little Whisker, training to try and become a firebender. Naruto recognized the voice right away, and only 2 people ever called him Whisker, so he knew who it was before he even turned around. While the other would use it as an insult and a means of mocking him, the first would use it as a benign nickname. It was obvious that the person who had said it now was using it as the inferior of the 2. The irritated Naruto turned to face his adopted cousin, who was with Mai and Ty Lee. "What do you want, Azula?" "As I don't have the time or the patience to deal with you today," he said. Azula pretended to be offended by Naruto's statement and said, "Oh, how hurtful is that anyway to greet your dear cousin?" Naruto tried to ignore Azula and concentrate on his training, saying, "It's no worse than how you treated me, now what do you want, as I'm busy?" In an attempt to irritate Naruto, Azula replied, "Oh, nothing much, the girls and I were just walking around and we saw you training and decided it would be fun to watch you try to firebend." Naturally, Naruto ignored Azula's jeers and kept practicing his stances for a few minutes. Azula chose to try a different approach to reach Naruto after realizing that he would not respond to her taunts. Azula approached Naruto and shoved him away, saying, "It seems that you still not quite get it, Whisker, so let me show you how a real firebender does things." She then assumed a basic fighting stance and blasted a strong burst of fire at a nearby tree branch. Shao-Zi was eating his apple while perched on the same branch. The small monkey narrowly avoided the blast by leaping off the branch, which was soon consumed by the flames and burned off the tree, when Shao-Zi noticed the huge fire blast approaching him. When Naruto saw what Azula had done, he exclaimed, "Shao-Zi," and rushed to his little friend, who was trembling like a leaf and terrified beyond belief. Naruto picked up Shao-Zi as soon as he was beside the small monkey, held him close, and panted to soothe the poor creature. Naturally, Azula simply grinned cruelly, pleased with her actions. Despite being the only one, her enjoyment was not shared by her friends Ty Lee and Mai. When they saw what Azula had done to poor Shao-Zi, Ty Lee was naturally shocked. Mai, on the other hand, was not at all surprised and remained expressionless, though she did frown a little. Azula noticed the expressions on her friends' faces when she turned to face them. Azula questioned, "What?" as though she had done nothing wrong. Tai Li worriedly questioned, Azula, why did you do that to poor Shao Ozi? He didn't do anything. I was just showing Whiskers how firebending was Donia, besides it was just a monkey, it's not like he valuable or anything, replied Azula. Naruto angrily yelled, shut up, while glaring at Azula for her actions. Naturally, Azula grinned when she saw this, relieved that she had reached Naruto. Naruto became even more enraged when Azula said, oh, I'm sorry, are you upset that I scared lil friend? With a sadistic smirk. You can insult and push me around all you want, Azula, but I won't stand when you attack any of my friends, said Naruto with rage. Oh, and what can someone like you, who can't even firebend, do? Even Zu can do better than you, and that says a lot, answered Azula. I can do more than you think, Azula, and I am more than happy to show you, replied Naruto. Azula grinned evilly and asked, is that so? Well, that sounds like a challenge to me, and I'd be more than happy to answer. Asking, what do you mean? Naruto said. Azula used the exact insult to agitate Naruto, saying, I challenge you to an Agni Kaya, do you accept, or are you too scared to face a real firebender? Naruto, who was too furious with Azula at the moment to think clearly, replied, fine, I accept. Tai Li admonished, no Naruto, don't, you can't win against Azula, you get who? But Azula cut him off. Quiet, Tai Li, he accepted my challenge and he can't back out of it now, not unless he wants to be disgraced, well, is it, Whiskers? Azula asked, turning from Tai Li to Naruto while emphasizing the word with a mean smile. With a furious, like hell I will, let's do it here and now and get it over with, response, Naruto set Shao Ozi down in a secure location before assuming a fighting stance. Azula smirked and said, oh no, we won't have it here, it just won't suit, we'll hold things off and give you time to train a bit more, not that it helps though. We'll have the duel in a fortnight's time, that way. No. One can say I didn't give you a sporting chance. Naruto said, fine, not giving a damn about where or when he battled Azula. Azula simply grinned after hearing Naruto's reply, and Tai Li and Mai quickly trailed behind. However, both girls looked at Naruto with a hint of concern because they were aware of Azula's firebending prowess and her potential for brutality. As a result, they did not think Naruto could defeat Azula. Naruto and Shao Ozi were left alone in the royal garden once more when the girls swiftly turned around and began to follow Azula after they had finished staring back at Naruto. A few hours later, in Naruto's chamber, Naruto was reading one of his father's scrolls on fire bending when he heard his room's massive double doors open. He looked to see who had opened the doors and saw Iroh, his adopted father, come in, followed closely by Zuko. Naruto, is it true? Did you really accept an Agni Kai challenge from Azula? Replied Zuko. I did, Naruto answered. Naruto, why did you do such a thing? You're not yet ready for such a thing, as you still need to train more in controlling your flames, Iroh said. After Naruto calmed down, he realized what he had gotten himself into. I'm sorry, Dad. It's just that when I was training, Azula started to taunt me and then attack Shao Ozi, and I got so angry at her that I couldn't think straight. Iroh sighed upon hearing this, assuming Azula had somehow coerced Naruto into accepting her challenge. He first learned about the challenge following the conclusion of the War Council meeting, when Azula went into the throne room and publicly informed her father that she had challenged Naruto to an Agni Kai, a challenge he had accepted. Iroh attempted to interrupt after hearing this, claiming that Naruto and Azula were both too young to battle an Agni Kai. Unfortunately, Ozai overruled him, claiming that Naruto had accepted Azula's challenge and that the fight could not be stopped because Azula was more than capable of fighting in an Agni Kai. Iroh hurried to Naruto's room as soon as he heard this, and Zuko, who had learned of the incident from Mai, joined him. Despite Naruto's recent assurance that he could firebend, Zuko, like Tai Li and Mai, did not think he could defeat Azula. It did not imply that he could defeat Azula in combat because, like his grandfather Fire Lord Azulon, Azula was a firebending prodigy who would crush Naruto. Well, what's done is done, as there is no point in worrying over something that has happened, and now we must prepare you for your match against Azula, said Iroh. Naruto asked enthusiastically, so you're going to help me train? Believing that his adopted father would teach him a brand new firebending technique that would enable him to defeat Azula. The former fire general grinned and said, of course. But first, let's sit down and have a nice hot cup of jasmine tea. When the two young boys saw this, they just stared at him incredulously, with big drops of perspiration on the back of their heads, wondering if Iroh was sometimes completely correct. Agni Kai Chamber. 2 weeks later, Princess Azula is currently patiently waiting for her opponent and adopted cousin Naruto to arrive on the battle platform. Since news of the impending conflict between the daughter of the Fire Lord and the adopted son of the former great general Iroh, better known as the Dragon of the Westa, had quickly spread, The chamber itself was packed with spectators. The actual crowd consisted of a large number of individuals, including royal guards, off-duty servants, noblemen and women, and significant military officers. Naturally, many were confident that Azula would prevail because it was widely known that she was an exceptionally talented firebending prodigy. However, some people, like the servants and a few of the guards, still had to stand by Naruto. Because the young blonde had gained some popularity among the palace's lower classes. Prince Zuko, the young crown prince, was also present in the crowd. He stood silently beside his father, who had come to witness the fight in order to see his daughter defeat his brother's son, and prove his worth. While Zuko watched for Iroh and Naruto to appear, he also noticed Mai and Ty Lee, who had come to witness the fight between the two members of the royal family, standing beside their own families. Before long, the chamber's enormous double doors opened, allowing Iroh, Naruto, and their personal guards to enter the spacious room together. There was a lot of whispering as the small group entered the chamber and started to move toward the battle platform. Many people were staring at the group, or more specifically, at Naruto, who appeared rather unkempt and filthy. Naturally, Naruto disregarded the looks and murmurs of the audience in favor of concentrating on Azula at the opposite end of the platform, who grinned self-assuredly as Naruto drew closer. Iroh knelt down to Naruto and placed both hands on his shoulders after Naruto lifted Sha Oz off his shoulder and handed him to his father, who then placed the small monkey on his own shoulder. This was after Naruto, Iroh, and their guards arrived at the platform. Now remember your firebending basics, Naruto, as well as what else I taught you. They're your greatest weapons, no matter who you face against. With a serious expression, Naruto said, I will, Dad. Who nodded to the young blonde and said, Good luck, Naruto, in his typical rough voice. With a supportive smile behind his mask, Jong put his hand on Naruto's shoulder and said, Show her and the rest of these snobs what you're capable of. 1. Naruto grinned and said, You can count on it. Iroh and the guards then moved to the stands, where Naruto ascended the platform's little stairs and Iroh stood next to his brother Ozai in the front row. Azula raised her voice once Naruto was on the platform. Well, looks like you finally showed up, and are even dressed in a style that suits your class, although I must say, I was half expecting you to back out or run away. As if, Naruto said, squinting his eyes. Well, it doesn't matter right now because this won't take long, because by the time I'm done with you, you won't be able to use any of your ninja techniques in an Agni Kai match. Even Uncle Iroh won't be able to look at you, Azula remarked, grinning sadistically. Naturally, Naruto didn't respond to this. Instead, he merely narrowed his eyes. He and Azula then knelt down and waited for the match observer to start, with their backs to each other. Ozai made the decision to tease his brother a little while the crowd waited for the game to start. I do hope that your son can put up a fight, for if not, this will not be much of a battle. My brother Naruto is more than capable of handling himself, so you don't need to worry about him, Iroh said gravely. Ozai said, We shall see, while continuing to watch the two young people. He didn't really believe his brother because he was sure that his daughter would easily defeat the monstrous creature that his brother had brought into their household. The match observer soon started the fight, and when the two young men turned to face one another, they got up and assumed fighting positions. Azula launched a big red and orange fireball at Naruto to start things off quickly. As soon as Naruto saw the ball approaching, he jumped to the left to avoid it. Azula launched another fireball at Naruto after realizing that he had dodged her initial blow. Naruto swiftly ducked beneath the ball of fire as it was about to strike him. Azula proceeded to thrust both of her fists forward and hurled a huge ball of fire at the blonde prince, saying, I see Uncle has taught you how to duck and run around like a coward, but I doubt he taught you what a real firebender can do, so allow me to show you. Knowing that this time he would not be able to sidestep or suck under the massive fireball, Naruto leapt far into the air and flipped over the fireball as it was about to hit him, narrowly avoiding it. Whoa! Close one, Naruto uttered. You enjoy that? Azula fired another enormous fireball with both of her fists, saying, Well, here's some more. As soon as he realized he couldn't escape this attack, Naruto immediately assumed the defensive position his father had taught him, in which he brought his hand down in a downward slash, causing the fireball to split in two and fly past him on either side. Azula and many others in the audience were naturally taken aback by Naruto's use of an advanced fire-blocking technique after witnessing this. I guess I misjudged your whiskers a little, but let's see if you can block them all, Azula exclaimed as she unleashed 3 more powerful fireballs. Because of his shinobi training and the numerous times he played with Ty Lee, Naruto was able to quickly avoid the 3 fireballs in a series of amazing acrobatic skills. Azula said, Not bad, Naruto, but it'll take more than just fancy dodging to win this fight, as she got ready to unleash another round of fireballs. In response to this remark, Naruto simply grinned and said, "Oh, you were fighting? I thought we were just warming up, not getting serious yet." "You haven't seen anything yet," Azula exclaimed as she launched another round of fireballs at Naruto, who still managed to avoid them as they approached. Naruto grinned and said, "Come on Azula, is that all you got?" as she avoided another fireball. Azula swiftly approached Naruto on the platform, where he had previously been just a few feet away, after becoming irritated by his remarks. Her wide spinning kick unleashed a wide blazing arc of fire at Naruto, who fled the fire attack by leaping high into the air. When Naruto landed on the ground and realized he was approaching Azula, he taunted, "Is that really all you got? As I gotta say, I'm disappointed. They'll call anyone a prodigy these days." "Not even close," was Azula's irate response as she squinted and shot a stream of fire at Naruto, who barely escaped it. Naruto dodged the attack and was taunted, "Missed again. I have to admit, I thought you were better than this. Even Zuko can do better than you right now." Azula angrily yelled, "Damn you!" and threw another fireball at him. She was beginning to lose her temper because Naruto was avoiding all of her attacks, making her appear foolish, and implying that Zuko was superior to her. Naturally, Naruto ducked under the fireball as soon as possible and then stood back up, continuing to taunt his female cousin. "You missed again. Yesh, Azula, you're getting sloppy, very sloppy." The enraged Azula yelled, "Shut up you filthy peasant," because Naruto was still making fun of her and avoiding all of her blows, making her appear inept. Given how frequently Azula would taunt and mock him and Zuko over the months, Naruto naturally grinned at this. It was good to give Azula a taste of her own medicine. Even so, his taunting of her was more than just a way for him to exact revenge on Azula for everything she had done to him over the months. In reality, his father had devised a plan to aid him in his fight against Azula, which included his taunts. Go back in time to 2 weeks ago. Naruto had to leap high into the air to avoid another ball of fire that was coming his way after he had dodged one of Iroh's fireballs. Naturally, this went on for a few more minutes until Iroh decided it was time to take a break and enjoy a nice cup of tea. He also mentioned that he needed to take a break because he was getting older and they had been doing this for a number of hours. Naruto made the decision to ask Iroh a question while Iroh was pouring tea for both of them. "Dada, why are you having me do all this? I thought you were going to teach me some advanced firebending moves to beat Azula." Iroh, of course, did not respond right away. He took another sip of his tea slowly, but after he was done, he turned to face his adopted son. Before taking another sip of his tea, Iroh responded, "What I'm teaching you, Naruto, is something much more important than firebending." Naruto said, "What?" by moving around and avoiding attacks, because he thought the entire concept was absurd. "Yes," Iroh said plainly. Naruto, who was still unable to comprehend his adopted father's thoughts, said, "But what good will that do me when Azula is trying to roast me alive with her flames?" Iroh replied, "Then let me show you." He then approached Shao-Zi, who was contentedly munching on some nuts that Iroh had previously given him, and he whispered to the small monkey. When Iroh finished whispering, he turned back to Naruto and simply said, "Eek," in agreement. "Now Naruto, I want you to try and catch Shao-Zi." "Huh?" said Naruto, bewildered. Iroh grinned and repeated, "I want you to try and catch Shao-Zi." Unable to understand why his adoptive father wanted him to capture Shao-Zi, Naruto questioned, "But why?" The former general said, "Just humor an old man," grinning at his son, who simply sighed and followed his father's instructions to try to capture the small monkey, who swiftly leapt away and scampered a few feet from Naruto before turning around and giving him a cheeky smile. "Come here, Shao-Zi, you know I won't hurt you," Naruto said, frowning as he approached the small monkey and extended his hand in an attempt to pick it up. Naturally, Shao-Zi simply smiled once more before sprinting directly towards Naruto, dodging his hand and sprinting between his legs. As Naruto attempted to catch Shao-Zi, he fell to the ground. The irate Naruto yelled, "Damn you to Shao-Zi, come back here," as he got up and started to run after his pet monkey. Naturally, this persisted for the next hour or so as Naruto pursued Shao-Zi throughout the tiny clearing in an effort to catch the young monkey. However, Shao-Zi consistently eluded Naruto's attempts because, despite his diminutive size, the little monkey was incredibly quick and nimble, making him extremely challenging to capture. Naturally, Iroh found this to be very entertaining, laughing every time Naruto was unable to capture Shao-Zi and fell to the ground. This continued for about an hour and a half before Naruto finally passed out from exhaustion, landing on his back and beginning to pant to catch his breath. When Shao-Zi realized that Naruto was too exhausted to pursue him further, he approached Iroh, scaled his robes, and perched on his shoulder before extending his tiny paw. After grinning, Iroh pulled some bakui berries from his sleeve and gave them to Shao Ozi, who let out a squeal of joy because bakui berries were his favorite. Iroh handed the bakui berries to Shao Ozi before approaching Naruto, who was still on the ground, gasping for air. Naruto couldn't believe his friend had sold him out for bakui berries, so he narrowed his eyes in frustration when he looked up at his father and saw Shao Ozi munching on some of the berries Iroh had given him. "Pant, panta traitor a pant, pant," said the seasoned Naruto, glaring at the small monkey perched on Iroh's shoulder. Iroh ignored Naruto's comment and kept eating his berries. Iroh looked down at Naruto and said, "Well Naruto, do you now understand what I've been trying to teach you?" with a smile of amusement. "No," Naruto answered. Iroh said, "Well, then let me explain further," and he sat down on the ground beside Naruto. Iroh asked, "Tell me, how do you feel right now?" "Tried," was Naruto's response. "Anything else?" Iroh inquired. "Annoyed, I guess." "Do you feel frustrated and even angry a little?" Iroh responded. Naruto said, "A little, I guess," feeling a little irritated and angry because he was missing Shao Ozi. Iroh said, "Ah well, now you know how Azula will feel when you use this against her." Naruto gave him a perplexed look in return, so he chose to elaborate. "You see Naruto, any technique I can teach you to help in your fight against Azula will do you no good, as you've yet to fully master the basics of firebending, because your flames are much stronger than most. Hence any advanced moves I could teach you would be worthless unless you have fully mastered the basics first, which will be impossible right now given the time we have before your match. This is why I am training you how to dodge your opponent's attacks, as this type of training can help you increase your speed and reaction time, as avoiding attacks are the most more important thing you can do when in a fight. As the more an enemy's attacks miss you, the weaker they become, since attacking takes much more energy than avoiding an attack dose, not to mention the fewer injuries you have the betters." As Naruto began to grasp what his father was attempting to convey, he asked, "So you want me to wear Azula out?" "That is one possible way to beat her, as given your level now and even with your white flames, it is unlikely you could beat Azula in a head-to-head fight, since she has a great deal of natural skill and has been training for several years. While you Naruto, have only been training for a few months, and a man who had trained for years to fight with a wooden sword, will always beat a novice with a metal sword." Naruto nodded his head in comprehension upon hearing this, even though he was still intrigued by something else. Iroh simply nodded and grinned at Naruto's increasingly clever statement. "You said that if I continued to dodge Azula's attacks that wearing her out was one possible way to beat her. Meaning that there is another way to beat her by using this strategy." "Yes, there is, for you see, like in all the bending arts, a bender must be both focused and in control of oneself when they bend an element. This is especially important for firebenders, since fire is alive, and if not controlled, then their powers will go out of control. Hence if you continue to dodge Azula's attacks, like when you continued to fail to catch Shao Ozi, she can become frustrated and even angered. This then opens up the chance that she will make a mistake, allowing you an opening to exploit and defeat her when she is unprepared." Naruto nodded in comprehension upon hearing this, and the two of them proceeded to continue their training after sharing some more tea. Final flashback. Unfortunately, Azula was still able to control herself and concentrate on Naruto, sending multiple fireballs at him simultaneously despite his plan to make her angry. Given how close she was to him now, he had little choice but to jump to the platform's left hand corner, which left him surrounded and with nowhere else to go. Azula yelled, "Now I have you," as she positioned herself squarely in front of Naruto and blasted him with a strong blast of fire. Luckily, Naruto managed to evade the attack. As Azula was about to launch her blow, he leapt into the air, flipped her over, and landed behind her. He then swiftly performed a leg sweep, which sent Azula falling forward. Azula barely avoided falling off the platform when the Fire Princess swiftly brought her hands forward and used them to help her flip back onto her feet, landing at the edge of the platform's corner. Azula swiftly regained her balance before spinning around and hurling a strong stream of fire in Naruto's direction. Naruto had to retreat back to the opposite end of the platform, which was where Azula began, as she proceeded to follow the fire stream up with a series of additional fireballs and a strong blazing arc. Azula immediately composed herself after Naruto reached the other end of the platform, realizing that Naruto had been making fun of her, so that she would become irate, lose self-control, and commit an error. A strategy she had frequently employed on Zuko on multiple occasions when they sparred. Azula grinned at Naruto as soon as she had calmed down, saying, "Nice try Whiskers, but it'll take more than simply tricks like that to beat me." Naruto narrowed his eyes when he saw that Azula had realized what he was doing. Since Azula was no fool, he wasn't shocked that she had discovered his plan. Nevertheless, he had hoped to keep Azula sufficiently irate and frustrated so that she wouldn't discover the truth until it was too late. Azula yelled, "Now that I've realized your pitiful little strategy, you're finished," and unleashed a massive, potent fire blast at Naruto. Naruto decided it was finally time to fight back when he saw the fire blast approaching him. He instantly assumed a fighting stance and unleashed a tiny but potent white fire blast. Despite the medium size of the blast, Naruto was pushed back a little by its force, but he maintained his stance because of his father's training. The people watching the fight raised their arms to shield themselves from the flames' heat as Naruto's white flames crashed directly into Azula's flames, causing a small explosion. Naturally, Azula was taken aback by the fire explosion, not only because Naruto possessed firebend but also because his flames were entirely white. In addition to the fact that it was something she had never seen or heard before, Naruto's white flames did not extinguish like hers did. Rather, they remained burning on the ground. Fortunately, the explosion was so small that the flames did not spread far enough to burn anyone watching the fight. Azula hardly noticed the 3 balls of white fire flying in her direction as she gradually recovered from her shock at Naruto firebending and his white flames. Azula dropped to her stomach on the ground, barely avoiding the 3 balls of white fire that were approaching her. She felt the heat from the 3 balls of fire flying past her as they passed by on her back. Naturally, the heat was so intense that they almost set her clothing on fire. The balls of fire then struck the big double doors that Naruto and Iroh had previously passed through, burning through them and leaving big holes in them. The flames then dropped to the ground and burned there. Azula was furious and perplexed, thinking, "What is going on? What are those flamesa? How can that vagabond even use flames like that?" It didn't make sense to her that a common person like Naruto could use flames that strong. Azula swiftly got up after dodging Naruto's blow and tried to retaliate by hurling a massive stream of fire at him. Naruto swiftly retaliated by hurling his own stream of fire at her. As soon as the 2 flames came into contact, Naruto's flames consumed Azula's, making them stronger and moving directly in her direction. Azula closed her eyes just as the flames were about to strike her because she could not dodge them in time. Along with the flames he had previously fired, which were still burning, Naruto extinguished his own flames. Azula opened her eyes to see Naruto extinguishing his white flames after she stopped feeling his flames scorching her body. Azula asked incredulously, "What did you do? Why didn't you finish me off?" after Naruto had her but had halted his attack. "Because family shouldn't hurt family. I may not like you, Azula, and you may not like me either. But whether you like it or not, we are family now and I won't hurt a member of my family, so let's end this fight now before either of us gets hurt," said Naruto, who took a non-aggressive. When Iroh heard this, he grinned proudly at his adopted son, just as he had when he saw Naruto's attack on Azula was about to happen. Fortunately, Naruto halted the attack before it could harm and probably kill Azula, despite his worst fears. He was even more pleased that Naruto was making an effort to put an end to this madness because he had never wanted this fight to start in the first place, wanted it to end, and hoped Azula would listen to reason. Unfortunately, Azula did not. Instead, she interpreted Naruto's gesture as a chance to take advantage of, and she responded by firing 3 more bursts of fire at Naruto, followed by a massive fire arc. Naruto saw the attacks coming and realized that he couldn't use his own flames to stop them all in time. Not before he lost control of his flames and struck many of the fight's spectators. He therefore concluded that his only option was to avoid them, dodging the flames with his exceptional acrobatic abilities. Azula realized something when she saw this, and a tiny, menacing smile came to her face. "I must admit, Naruto, when I first saw those flames of yours I began to worry, but now I see despite how powerful they are, you still can't fully control them. That's why you tried to make me angry and lose focus, so that it would be easier for you to take me out. You need to take a solid stance before you can fire your flames, due to the backlash of firing them," said Azula. Naturally, Naruto didn't reply to Azula's comment because he knew she was correct and that his firebending was limited because he hadn't had it for very long. Naruto remained on the defensive for the next few minutes, continuing to dodge Azula's blows, who reduced the amount of space Naruto could move around by slowly approaching him while shooting her flames. As Azula continued to fire blasts at Naruto, she said, "But do you know what the funny thing, Issa? If you hadn't stopped your flames when you had me, you would have won. But instead, like the weakling that you are, you stopped him. I guess you really are just like Uncle Iroh, soft and worthless." But in the end, Azula cornered Naruto in the platform's left hand corner. When Azula cornered Naruto, she exclaimed, "Nowhere to run now, Whiskersa," and then, "Now burn," as she threw a strong stream of fire at him, enveloping him in flames. Zuko exclaimed, "Naruto," as he witnessed his sister shoot his adopted cousin with the stream of fire. Naruto! Exclaimed Tai Li, who was terrified that Azula had actually killed Naruto. Even Mai, who had been engulfed in Azula's flames, expressed some concern for Naruto's safety. Ozai, on the other hand, grinned, thinking that Naruto was now flawlessly done Azula. However, his grin vanished as soon as he considered the white flames that Naruto had produced, and he questioned how in the world he had done so. Given that they were obviously stronger than regular flames and that they didn't go out when Naruto fired them, they actually kept burning. Ozai started to question whether his brother Iroh had taught Naruto how to make those flames as he gave them more thought. Because he didn't think that a mere commoner like Naruto could produce such strong flames on his own. However, when Ozai looked at his brother, he did not see Iroh sobbing or becoming enraged over the death of his adopted son. He noticed that his brother was still completely composed and unconcerned. Ozai's eyes widen in surprise and bewilderment as he swiftly turns back to the platform, perplexed by his brother's lack of concern. When Azula looked to see what was left of Naruto after she had finished her attack and her flames had gone out, she was shocked and confused to see that there was no body. Naturally, Azula was aware that Naruto's body could not be totally destroyed by her flames. Therefore, a body had to exist, but he was nowhere to be found. Azula started searching for Naruto after realizing that he must have escaped the attack in some way, but she was unable to locate him. Azula was about to call Naruto out, claiming that he was a coward and that he couldn't defeat her in proper Agni Kai, believing that he must have used one of his ninja tricks. Her intention was to provoke him and entice him out. She was about to do so when she heard Naruto's voice above her. Looking for me. Azula and the other onlookers observed Naruto floating in midair with white, medium-sized flames emerging from his hands when they looked up. Everyone in the crowd, including Ozai, Zuko, Tai Li, and Mai, was shocked to see that Naruto was using jet propulsion. Using it to fly was an advanced firebending move that even the majority of firebending masters would find challenging, but he was performing it at a level that none of them or anyone else in more than a century could. Iroh, his guards, and Naruto's guards Hu and Zhang were the only people in the room who weren't shocked by what Naruto was doing because they all knew he could accomplish this. As soon as Ozai noticed this, he turned to face his brother angrily, and the brother simply grinned in amusement while he stared at him. "You taught him how to do that, didn't you?" Ozai angrily charged, finding it infuriating that a common-born vagrant could perform an advanced firebending move that neither he nor his daughter could. 2. Iroh smiled and said, "No, brother, I didn't. Don't lie to me, Iroh. There's no possible way that that boy could do an advanced level move like that and do it at that level that's he doing without some kind of special training," said Ozai with rage. As he recalled the first time he saw Naruto use the jet propulsion skill, Iroh smiled and said, "I'm afraid I'm telling you the truth, brother. Naruto discovered this on his own, though I will admit I did give him some tips on helping him to maneuver when flying and stay still in midair." Rewind. Iroh heard Naruto scream as he and his guards were making their way to the training area outside the capital. He then witnessed something fly quickly over them and collide with something. Hu and Zhang rushed up to them, their faces filled with worry, before Iroh or his men could wonder what had passed them. "Hu, Zhang, what happened? What was that thing that flew by and where is Naruto?" replied Iroh. Zhang's response, "Sir, that thing that you just saw, was Prince Naruto," left the former Dragon of the West with a perplexed and somewhat alarmed expression. He then hurried to where Naruto went with his guards, Hu and Zhang. The group eventually located the young blonde, who had a big bump on his head and was tangled in multiple branches of a large tree. The blonde prince groaned in agony, "Oh, hhhhh," as he attempted to shake off the stars that were currently dancing around his head. "Are you okay, Naruto?" inquired Iroh. Naruto said, "Yeah, I think so, Dad," while continuing to try to stop the world from spinning. Iroh said, "Hold on, we'll come up and get you down." He then asked Zhang and Hu to climb the tree and assist his adopted son in getting down. With the assistance of his two guards, Naruto was back on the ground after a short while. Iroh then made the decision to question Naruto about what had transpired. Iroh grinned slightly and said, "So tell me, Naruto, how is it that you got up in that tree? Were you blown back by your white flames again, when you were practicing your firebending?" Naruto retorted, "Well, not exactly. I was actually practicing a new technique that I came up with, which I thought would help me in my fight against Azula." "Oh, and what method would that be?" Iroh inquired out of general interest. "After all the times I practiced my firebending, I was blown away. I reasoned that perhaps I could devise a method that would allow me to fly in addition to using it to accelerate my movement." With a corny smile, Naruto remarked, "But as you can see, I haven't exactly gotten the hang of it yet. But I promise before my fight with Azula, I will have it down and fly circles around her with it. After hearing this, Iroh was naturally taken aback by what Naruto had said because, whether his son realized it or not, he was attempting a very sophisticated technique. Nevertheless, he had to acknowledge that Naruto's idea had merit because of the strength of his flames. That is a very interesting idea you have, Naruto. Perhaps you can show me how well you have developed this technique of yours, as perhaps there is something I know that could help you improve. Naturally, Naruto grinned when he heard this because he was excited to show his father what he was capable of. The two of them then went to the clear, where they had been training Naruto, accompanied by their guards. When they reached the middle of the clearing, Naruto used his white flames to slowly summon them to his hands and point them toward the ground. He then gradually increased the power of the flames, causing them to grow and lift him several feet into the air, then higher and higher until he was at least 20 feet in the air. Since most firebending masters could never perform an advanced level firebending move at this level, Iroh and his guards were naturally shocked to see Naruto perform it. What was even more shocking to them was that Naruto had only been able to firebend a few months prior, and he had accomplished something similar in just a few days. However, Naruto abruptly lost control of his flames when he attempted to move while in the air, and he flew in the direction of a nearby tree. Naruto! Iroh exclaimed in alarm as he witnessed Naruto colliding with the tree. Fortunately, Naruto was prepared this time and was able to shoot himself up into the air and avoid the tree by quickly pointing both of his hands toward the ground and firing a brief burst of flames. After launching himself a little higher into the air, Naruto began to fall toward the tree he had almost struck, but he managed to stop himself by grabbing onto one of its thick branches. He then swung off the tree and landed back on the ground, where Iroh and the others rushed to him. "Are you okay, Naruto? Are you in pain?" Iroh, who was worried, asked. Naruto dismissed himself and said, "No, I'm fine, Dad." Iroh simply grinned in relief. "Like you guys saw, I don't have much control in mid-air, where I can't do much other than go up and down." As he and Naruto started their new training, Iroh said, "Yes, I can see that. Well, I think I can help you with that." Final flashback. Ozai became even more irate when he heard his brother claim that Naruto had learned the jet propulsion skill on his own. However, after giving it some more thought, he realized that Naruto's ability to do so was due to his white flames, which made sense because he had previously witnessed their power and because they were far more potent than regular flames. As Iroh watched his young adopted son float in midair, he couldn't help but find it amusing that despite Naruto's rapid acquisition of the jet propulsion skill, he still struggled to perform standard firebending moves. Naruto had to practice the skill until the very last minute. No one was more shocked than Azula, who kept staring at Naruto in midair as everyone else continued to marvel at his ability to fly. She still couldn't believe that Naruto could do this, but she soon overcame her shock and threw a huge ball of fire at Naruto. The next thing anyone watching the fight saw was Naruto appear behind Azula and sweep her legs from behind, causing her to fall on her back. Naruto, of course, just smirked when he saw this, and then vanished in a blur just before the ball of flames could hit him. Naruto was able to accomplish this because his flames not only allowed him to fly through the air, but they also had a high velocity that allowed him to move at amazing speeds. Naruto then stooped over her, prepared to deal the last blow. "What are you waiting for? Get it done." Knowing she was done, the young fire princess exclaimed. Naruto looked at the match observer and said, "I don't need to. I already won." The observer simply nodded. "The battle is over. The winner is Prince Naruto." The entire chamber erupted in a roaring cheer when Naruto was declared the winner of the match. Naturally, the palace servants and off-duty royal guards, who had supported Naruto from the start, gave the loudest cheers. Since they had all been impressed by Naruto's skill, particularly with his new white flames, many of the noble families even joined in the applause. Naturally, some people were still in disbelief because they couldn't comprehend that the Fire Lord's daughter Azula, a firebending prodigy, had been defeated by Naruto, a low-class foreign orphan who had been fortunate enough to be adopted into the royal family. Naruto couldn't help but smile as he heard the applause. At last, people were beginning to recognize him. However, Azula angrily smacked his hand away when he extended it to help her up, offering friendship and respect for fighting so skillfully. "Don't touch me, you filthy commoner. I don't want your pity." With a disappointed shake of his head, Naruto turned to face his adopted father, who had ascended the platform with his guards and was approaching them. When Azula stood up again and noticed Naruto facing away from her, the young princess saw an opportunity to retaliate. With her defeat to Naruto still fresh in her mind, the girl angrily exclaimed, "Don't you ever turn your back against me, peasant," as she got ready to launch a stream of fire at him. Iroh saw this and was about to intervene to stop her attack, but before he could, his brother Ozai materialized behind her, grabbed her shoulder, and prevented her from striking. Furious that his daughter had lost to Naruto, Ozai angrily hissed, "That's enough. Do not shame me further than you already have." Azula gave in at this point because she was afraid to defy her father, though she did give Naruto a fierce look. Naruto simply let out another disappointed sigh at this. He then approached his adoptive father, who was grinning at him with pride. "Well done, Naruto, I am very proud of you," replied Iroh. Who said, grinning slightly, "You fought very well, Naruto." Zhang said to Naruto in a low voice so that Azula and Ozai wouldn't hear him, "You sure showed little Miss Princess, who was top dog." "Eek!" exclaimed Shah Oz as he leapt from Iroh's shoulder onto Naruto's, grinning at him. Naruto grinned back and gently patted the small monkey on the head. "Thanks you guys, I couldn't have done it if it wasn't for your help." Iroh and his guards continued to congratulate Naruto on his victory for the next few minutes. Despite this, the congratulations quickly ended when Ozai approached them, accompanied by a silent Zuko and a furious Azula. When his father looked at him, he gave Naruto a brief grin of congratulations before returning to his neutral demeanor. Given how often Azula teased and made fun of him, Naruto knew how much his older cousin had wanted to see Azula brought down a peg or two. This made him smile. "A most impressive battle," was Ozai's neutral tone, but the young blonde could see the silent, icy rage in his eyes as he turned to face Naruto. It was extremely offensive to him that his beloved daughter had been defeated by a foreign commoner. Naruto responded politely, "Thanks you, Fire Lord Ozai," since he was aware of the consequences of speaking disrespectfully to his adopted uncle. Ozai narrowed his eyes and turned to face his older brother. "Perhaps you could tell me, brother, how your son came to wield these white flames?" he asked. Because he was positive that Iroh had taught Naruto how to make the white flames in some way. Naturally, Iroh was not surprised or alarmed by this question because he expected his brother to ask it. However, Naruto interrupted him before he could respond to the Fire Lord. "The reason why I can create my white flames is because of my bloodline, Fire Lord Ozai," stated Naruto. Ozai asked in shock, "Bloodline?" While Zuko and Azula both turned to stare at Naruto. Naruto lied, saying, "Yes," since Iroh had made up this lie to hide Naruto's special flames. Iroh was aware that Ozai would attempt to use Naruto as a human weapon against the other countries and cause unimaginable damage to the lands if he found out. Given that his brother had brought Naruto back to the Fire Nation, Ozai was obviously aware of bloodlines. He asked him to write a report on the shinobi, a warrior race, and the elemental continuant, including everything he had learned about it. According to the report, only specific members of a shinobi clan or family could possess bloodlines. Naturally, Zuko and Azula were also aware of bloodlines since Iroh and Naruto had brought them up shortly after Iroh and Naruto had returned to the Fire Nation. Ozai narrowed his eyes and said, "And why exactly was I not informed of this when you first arrived?" "I'm afraid I did not know of Naruto abilities at the time. Naruto himself did not know until he started training with me to firebend," Iroh responded with a half-truth. Ozai narrowed his eyes even more at this point, but he quickly came to terms with the story because, like his brother, he thought the powers of bloodlines were fascinating. In an effort to acquire shinobi with some of these bloodlines, he had also considered sending an expedition to the elemental continuant, because he thought they would be very helpful in their conflict with the Earth Kingdom. However, it appeared that fate had chosen to send them Naruto, who had one of these bloodlines and was able to summon strong white flames that could destroy anything they hit, overwhelm and consume all other fire, and do who knows what else. Ozai started thinking about how he could use Naruto and his white flames as he gazed at him calculatingly. Because it appealed to him to have a group of exceptional firebenders who could produce potent white flames. The Fire Lord became increasingly fond of this concept as he considered it. But as he did, he started to question how he could accomplish this, since he was aware that bloodlines could not be taught to others. Only the offspring of those who possessed bloodline abilities could inherit them. However, as he considered this, a thought flashed through his mind, and he glanced first at Naruto and then at his daughter, who continued to glare at the young blonde. At that moment, Iroh and Naruto noticed a slight dark smirk on his face, which caused them to worry a little. "If I can't get the boy to teach others how to create these flames of his, perhaps I can breed them out of him," Ozai pondered pensively. Even so, he thought it disgusting to mix his family's royal blood with that of a foreign commoner. Ozai thought the benefits were well worth the cost because they could create an unstoppable force of firebenders by combining Naruto's white flames with Azula's innate talent. Nevertheless, considering what had transpired here, he was certain that both Iroh and Naruto would object to his daughter's marriage to Naruto, and he knew that she would vehemently oppose the idea. He therefore made the decision to find a method, whether by coercion or force, to get the two of them married. He only cared that they would have children with Naruto skills, and it didn't even matter if they weren't in love. Mai and Tai Li approached the group to congratulate Naruto and Azula on their excellent fighting skills while Ozai was still considering his idea. Tai Li exclaimed, "Azula, Naruto, you two were great. You were all whoosh, pow, wog, wuff and vvrroo," as she enthusiastically swung her arms around after witnessing Azula's distress. Then she went to give Azula a hug in an effort to reassure her that everything would be alright. But Azula angrily pushed her away before she could. Azula yelled, "Don't touch me, I don't want your sympathy," and then she bounded away. When Tai Li saw this, she pursued her friend in an attempt to lift her spirits, but not before giving Naruto a firm embrace. Naturally, Naruto blushed because this was the first time a girl had ever given him such a hug. She used the nickname she occasionally used to refer to Naruto, whispering into his right ear, "I'm glad you're safe, you were great Whiskers," before releasing him. Iroh grinned as he noticed his adopted son's face flushed after Tai Li gave him a hug. Ah, to be young, he thought. Before Mai turned to follow Tai Li and Azula, she gave Naruto a quick smile and said, "Not bad, Naruto." Mai then joined Tai Li in pursuing Tai Li. Naruto merely grinned at this, and then he, his adopted father, and their guards excused themselves from Ozai and left the platform, where many of the onlookers welcomed them. Everyone wanted to congratulate Naruto on his victory and express their admiration for his newfound abilities. Naruto and his father managed to get away from the crowd shortly after, and they celebrated in their own way by playing a friendly game of Pai Sho and drinking tea in Iroh's room. With Naruto, nearly 2 years had passed since the altercation between him and Azula, and things had gone rather well for the 11-year-old Naruto. In fact, they had gotten better in certain aspects. Naruto's firebending abilities had significantly improved since his fight with Azula following a year of intense training under his adopted father. Now that his flames were not blasting him away, he could better control them. His flying abilities also significantly improved, allowing him to soar through the air at even higher speeds and with better maneuverability. Even so, he still struggled with landing and making sharp turns, particularly when flying at high speeds, which led to multiple crash landings. Naruto also became the hero of the lower-class guards and palace servants following his battle with Azula. Because he had proven that even a common-born boy could defeat a member of the royal family in a significant battle between the common class and the higher class, defeating Azula handily in front of everyone in a fair battle. Following the battle, many of the guards and servants went above and beyond to show their respect by calling him by his official title, offering him anything he desired, and even bowing to him. Naturally, Naruto felt uneasy when they did all of this, but he knew there was nothing he could do about it because they looked up to him. Many noble families began to treat Naruto with greater respect as his reputation among them grew significantly. A few of them even extended an invitation for him to join them for dinner or to meet their families, specifically their daughters. Naturally, Naruto was not surprised by this, as he had been informed by his adoptive father, Iroh. Many noble families would attempt to persuade Naruto to join them after he revealed his white flames by offering one of their daughters as a bride or, better yet, by having their daughter attract him to them. Enabling them to improve their family's standing in the Fire Nation by enabling them to attempt to discover the key to his special firebending. Even though he was treated with more respect by many noble families, some people continued to treat him with contempt, because, in their eyes, Naruto's victory over Azula had degraded the noble class. In addition, a lot of people thought Naruto wasn't worthy of his power because they were envious of his ability to create white flames, which were obviously more potent than regular fire. Naturally, Naruto disregarded these individuals because his father had previously informed him that jealousy is a common emotion. It was best to ignore them because they are incapable of doing things. Surprisingly, Azula didn't really try to exact revenge on Naruto for her defeat. In fact, the female firebender mostly disregarded Naruto and made an effort to stay away from him. Only later did Mai inform Naruto that Fire Lord Ozai had commanded his daughter to keep her distance from him and not to try anything to harm him. Naturally, Naruto was taken aback by this news because the blonde was positive that his uncle would be the one to demand payment from him for defeating Azula. Considering that he had vanquished his beloved daughter in front of the majority of the royal court, later on, he even learned that a disagreement between the father and daughter caused their relationship to somewhat deteriorate. Nobody knew the precise topic of the argument. Despite her father's orders, Azula made sure to make Naruto pay in some way by limiting Naruto's time with Tai Li and Mai and making sure they were around her as much as possible. Since Naruto rarely saw either of his female friends, this obviously caused him a great deal of pain. Fortunately, however, he still had his adopted father, his personal guards Zhang and Hu, as well as some of the palace servants and guards, to hang out with, along with Zuko and Sha Ozi. His relationship with Ozai has also changed over the past year. The Fire Lord now treats Naruto with some respect, is polite to him, and occasionally speaks to him in a respectful manner. He even stopped making disparaging comments about Naruto's common birth and gave him praise. In an effort to help both Naruto and Azula get better at firebending, he also had them spar once a week under his close supervision. Most people thought that Ozai was showing interest in Naruto by making these attempts, but in reality, they were merely ways to find out more about Naruto White Flames. Ozai's true intentions were soon discovered by both Iroh and Naruto, which is why Iroh always made sure he was with Naruto when he went to spar with Azula. In order to prevent things from getting out of hand between them and to ensure that his brother didn't try anything on Naruto. However, they were unaware of Ozai's secondary objection. In order to eventually set up a marriage between Azula and Naruto, he intended to use the spars to help them grow closer. Unfortunately, the sparring only served to intensify the rivalry between the two cousins, and that plan was failing miserably. Naturally, the fact that Azula was so opposed to the idea of marrying Naruto, especially after losing to him in front of the majority of the palace and the noble family, did not help the situation. Even though Naruto had flames that could easily defeat her own, the fact that she lost to a mere commoner still stung. The conflict between the father and daughter Ozai wanted her to be closer to him, while she wanted nothing more than to defeat and kill him, led to this intense rivalry and dislike of her adopted cousin. Naruto was currently searching the palace for his father, with whom he was to meet for training. Naruto decided to check to see if his father was in his room after searching the palace's typical spots. As usual, Shah Oz sat on Naruto's shoulder and accompanied him. Naruto knocked on his adopted father's door after they reached his room. However, after not hearing back, Naruto opened the double doors and peered inside to confirm. Naruto assumed that his adopted father was still in the War Council meeting with the Fire Lord and the other generals after discovering that he wasn't in his room. Naruto went to the large bookshelf in his father's room, which was stocked with a variety of books and scrolls that his father had gathered over the years, and decided to wait here until his father returned. Simultaneously, Shah Oz leapt off Naruto's shoulder and proceeded to a small table laden with fruit, where he started to eat a red apple. Naruto made the decision to examine some of the scrolls and perhaps practice a new firebending move before his adopted father returned, unsure of how long he would have to wait. Naruto was shocked to discover that the scroll he had found was an airbending scroll rather than a firebending one, as he had assumed after taking it and opening it. 1. Since airbenders were essentially extinct, Naruto thought, an airbending scroll, but where did Dad find this? And why would he even have this? Since Iroh had ensured that Naruto was aware of the actual history of the four great nations rather than the Fire Nation propaganda version prior to his arrival in the Fire Nation, Naruto was naturally aware of airbenders from his father. The air nomads were the smallest of the four nations, based on Naruto's recollections. However, they were a tranquil, deeply spiritual people who coexisted peacefully with the natural world. Additionally, they were the only country where all of the people were benders. According to what his adopted father had told him, they traveled on flying bison, lived in enormous temples perched atop mountains, and were concealed in high mountain ranges. In the same way the dragons were the first to firebend, they were also supposedly the first creatures to airbend. Additionally, Naruto's father had told him that the air nomads shared many traits with him, including a strong sense of humor and a love of fun. However, even though they were peaceful, they were still vulnerable to the conflict, just as they were in the early years of the conflict a century ago. According to Fire Nation history, Fire Lord Sozin led his army to battle the air nomads and defeated them in a decisive battle after launching a devastating attack on them. The reality, however, was that Fire Lord Sozin had his armies massacre every air nomad, down to the last child, in a well-planned and unprovoked surprise attack on their temples. His adopted father claimed that Sozin had ordered the mass murder of the air nomads in order to obtain the Avatar, the only person on the planet capable of mastering each of the four elemental bending arts. Nevertheless, the Avatar managed to get away despite eliminating the majority of the air nomads, and it hasn't been seen in more than a century. Naturally, Naruto detested this aspect of his new country, in addition to the fact that they had launched an unnecessary conflict to subjugate the other countries. Additionally, Naruto believed that their eradication of an entire people was unacceptable. Naruto thought some of the airbending moves were pretty cool as he studied the scroll, and he wondered if he could combine them with his firebending. Deciding to give one of the moves a try to experience how it felt, Naruto began performing the moves on the scroll gradually. 2. A huge gust of air shot out of his hands as soon as he completed the move. Simultaneously, the room's door opened, and as the individual entered it, he was blown out. Naruto looked up as soon as he realized what he had done and saw that his adopted father, Iroh, was the person he had blown out of the room. Naruto ran over to Iroh, who had crashed into the wall behind him, and sobbed, "Dad, are you okay?" "Ooh, I'm afraid Nota, as I don't believe I will ever be able to dance the same way again." Knowing he was all right, Naruto grinned as soon as he heard his father say, "That might be a good thing, Dad. As to be honest, your moves weren't exactly that great." As Naruto assisted him in getting back up, Iroh asked in a mocking and exaggerated manner, "What? I will have you know, that when I was young I was praised by all for my cam elephant strut." As he guided his father back into the room and assisted him to a nearby seat, Naruto grinned and said, "Yeah, maybe back before the war started." Iroh grinned and remarked, "I'm old, but I'm not that old, but if you don't mind, could you tell me what happened? As one minute I was opening the door and the next, I was making a rather impressive imitation of a messenger hawk. At least until I had the ill fortune of bumping into the wall." Sorry, that was kind of my fault. You see, I came here looking for you, since we were supposed to train today. But I couldn't find you, so I decided to wait here until you showed up and maybe look at some of the scrolls you had in the wall." "What scroll did you look at?" "This is what Naruto said while displaying the airbending scroll to his father. "How do you have this?" "I came across this scroll when I was campaigning in the Earth Kingdom and decided to keep it, so that it wouldn't be destroyed." Naruto, who had learned about the Avatar from his father during their initial journey to the Fire Nation, questioned, "But how was I able to airbend just now? I thought only the Avatar could use the other bending arts, so wait, I can be the Avatar, can I?" "No, I don't believe so, Naruto. You're much too young, and the last No Avatar was said to have come from the air nomads, and lived over 100 years ago and disappeared right before the war started. But he would be long dead by now, and you said that right after the Avatar dies, he or she is reborn." "Yes, but if that was true, the Avatar would have been reborn in the Water Tribe and then the Earth Kingdom. Neither of which happened, which is why the Fire Nation believes he is still alive somewhere or was simply never reborn in air nomads." "But if that's true, then how am I able to airbend?" Iroh said nothing in response to this question, trying to come up with an explanation for how Naruto could airbend. But after a while, he recalled something, hurried to his bookshelf, picked up one of the big books, and opened it. Naruto spent the next few minutes watching his father flip through the book, taking a few moments to look at each page before moving on to the next. Naturally, Naruto asked his father what he was looking for in the book when he saw this, but to his surprise, he ignored him and kept reading the book. However, Naruto heard his father cry in triumph after a few minutes of searching. "Yes, I believe this explains everything. What is it, Dad? What did you find?" "I believe I found the reason why you're able to use both airbending and firebending." "How? What is that book?" "This book is something I picked up right before I found you, Naruto. You see, according to this book, your people are born with a naturally affinity for a specific element, much like how people from the Fire Nation can firebend. But unlike the four great nations, your people's affinity for elements is defined genetically, not by one's nationality. Also, unlike benders, your people can use more than one element. I believe you have an affinity for wind, which is how you're able to airbend. It also explains why you were unable to firebend until the Kyuubi gave you the ability. So because I have a natural affinity for wind and because I come from the elemental continent, I can bend both fire and wind?" "Yes, although it's also possible that you also have a hidden talent for airbending as well, which would explain how you did it naturally just now." Naruto exclaimed, "This is awesome," as he considered all the things he could accomplish after mastering the art of airbending. However, as he was applauding, his father's expression darkened. Naruto glanced back at him. "What's wrong, Dad? I thought this would be a good thing." The former fire general remarked, "Oh, it is, Naruto, it is wonderful. But it also puts you in a very unique position that could place you in grave danger." "What do you mean?" "If you were to reveal that you could airbend, there are others in the Fire Nation who would believe like you did, that you're the Avatar. Even if we explain our belief, most might not believe us, and even if they did, it would make you an even bigger target for my brother." "What do you mean?" "The reason why I was so late was because I was talking to one of your servant friends, who told me of an argument she overheard between my brother and Princess Azula." "What sort of argument?" "It seems my brother desires to find a way to use your unique white flames for himself. According to the servant, my brother wants Princess Azula to get closer to you and later arrange a marriage between the two of you." Naruto shouted, "WWWHHHHAATTT. Me marry Azula?" Sha Oz let out a startled cry and then hid behind the fruit bowl. Iroh softly begged, "Naruto, my boy, please do not hell," because he did not want to go deaf just yet and was afraid that someone would overhear them. Naruto expressed his disgust at the thought of marrying Azula, saying, "Sorry, but the idea of me marrying Azula is just a yoke." Although she was not officially his blood relative, Azula was nonetheless his cousin. "I understand, although I have to tell you such things are not that uncommon in noble families." Naturally, Naruto shuddered at the thought and confirmed his suspicion that noble families were strange. I guess that explains why the Fire Lord has been so nice to me. Yes, although I will admit I did not think he would go to such lengths to obtain your white flames. I also have no doubts that if he learned of your ability to airbend, he would go to even greater lengths. For you're the first person other than the Avatar to have the ability to bend more than one element. But how exactly would me marrying Azula help him gain my white flames? It's not like I can teach other people how to use them. I fear it because we made my brother think that your white flames were a bloodline and he believes that if you and Princess Azula were to marry and have children, your children would inherit the ability to use white flames, allowing him to have an elite group of firebenders, unlike any others that have exist. Given that it would account for the slight animosity between the father and daughter, Naruto questioned, I'm guessing that Azula doesn't agree with the Fire Lord's plan. Since this disagreement benefited them, Iroh responded, yes, it appears that Princess Azula finds the idea of marrying you as deplorable as you do. But I fear it is only a matter of time before my brother eventually forces his will and gets her to agree. Naruto chuckled slightly as he said, well, she welcome to try, but it will never happen. The notion of Azula flirting was absurd, to put it mildly. Azula preferred to scare or intimidate people into doing what she wanted, especially since Naruto was fairly certain that she didn't even know how to flirt with a boy, much less try to seduce him. Perhaps, but I would not be surprised if my brother tries and force a marriage between the two of you, Iroh said. Astonished, Naruto questioned, can he do that? There are very few things that the Fire Lord cannot do, Naruto, which is why I believe it may be best if you leave the capital for a while and stay out of sight. At least until I can think of something that will keep my brother from doing anything like that. But where will I go? Recently I have heard Prince Zuko will be leaving shortly to train in swordsmanship under Master Piandao, the Fire Nation's finest swordsmaster and maker. I believe I will be able to arrange for you to go with Prince Zuko and study under Master Piandao as well under the guises of training in swordsmanship as well. Naruto stated, but I don't want to leave because he disliked the thought of parting ways with his father. Iroh put his hand on Naruto's shoulder and said softly, and I do not wish you to leave either, Naruto. But this is for the best until things here settle. Besides, you will have Prince Zuko to keep you company, and although I'm sure he wouldn't admit it, I believe you would appreciate having a friend with him. Besides, you don't want to be hanging around with an old man like me all the time, you might start to smell like me. Naruto then stepped forward and gave his adopted father a strong hug, saying, I don't care if I do smell or not, you're my dad and I love you. A tiny tear appeared in Iroh's eye as Naruto said this, and he gave his adopted son a tender hug in return, saying, I love you too, Naruto. After 2 weeks, the two Fire Nation princes, Zuko and Naruto, reached Master Piandao's castle after a protracted journey from the capital. In order to ensure their safety, the two princes had been escorted to the castle by a royal procession. However, when they got there, Piandao's butler Fat insisted that only Naruto and Zuko could enter. The guards protested this, of course, but Zuko finally told them to leave and that everything would be alright. The two princes were permitted entry after the guards grudgingly complied with Zuko's order to depart. They eventually entered a spacious room with large windows all around to let in natural light after passing through the expansive castle courtyard and halls. Upon entering the room, Naruto and Zuko noticed a lone man doing calligraphy while seated with his back to them. The two princes naturally thought this was Master Piandao when they first saw him. To their astonishment, though, he ignored them and kept drawing without turning to face them. Both Zuko and Naruto were unsure of what to say or do, so they turned to each other to see if the other knew what to do. Both boys shrugged their shoulders and chose to wait for the master swordsman to acknowledge them after realizing they had no idea what to do. They were aware that attempting to get the man's attention could lead to their expulsion from the castle. Shao Ozi, who had been hiding beneath Naruto's shirt, poked his head out while the boys waited for Master Piandao to acknowledge their presence. Naruto attempted to persuade the small monkey to return to his shirt after spotting his little friend. Unfortunately, Shao Ozi jumped out of Naruto's shirt because he was too curious about his location to follow his master's instructions. After the small monkey escaped, Naruto hissed angrily, Shao Ozi no. Following his escape from Naruto, Shao Ozi surveyed his new surroundings. Upon spotting Master Piandao, he approached the man to find out what he was doing before Naruto could apprehend him. The young monkey swiftly scaled the elder master's back and perched on his shoulder to observe his activities. When Naruto saw this, he became terrified that Piandao would become enraged with his little friend. Zuko, on the other hand, could only sigh in frustration. He had anticipated this kind of thing, which is why he instructed Naruto to leave Shao Ozi with his father. However, his blonde cousin snuck his pet with him because he couldn't bear to leave him behind. The older teenager shook his head and gave Shao Oz a frustrated smack on the forehead after witnessing him climb Piandao's back and onto his shoulder. Naruto was about to apologize to the elder master and approach him to remove Shao Oz from his shoulder, but he was afraid of what would happen. However, Piandao put down his brush and began to pant the little monkey on the head with his index finger before he could speak or take any action. Before taking the small monkey off his shoulder and placing it in his left hand, the elder sword master said, little fellow, a fitting name. He then proceeded to stroke Shao Oz's head. 4. After a minute or so, Piandao kept petting the small monkey in his hand while turning to face the two boys. Piandao was a tall, thin, elderly-looking man with a small, well-groomed beard, short black hair tied up in a small knot, and a stern face. I am assuming given your appearance that you are Prince Naruto, General Iroh's son, and this little one here is your pet, the master said, turning to Naruto after glancing at the two princes. Yes I am, and yes Shao Oz belongs with me, but I consider him my friend more than a pet, and I'm sorry about him bothering you. That is quite all right, he obviously meant no harm, but I believe you should teach him to be more careful, as being too curious can be dangerous for someone so small. Naruto said, I will, but he was also relieved that Zuko and Piandao were not upset. Naruto. That is a rather unusual name. It means maelstrom, where I come from, Naruto answered, leaving out how the fact that his name also meant fish cake, since he never liked that about his name, even though it was a topping of his favorite food, ramen. I see, a very interesting. I have also heard that you come from a land far from the Fire Nation and the other 4 nations, and that it is filled with a warrior class with unique abilities, some of which are very similar to the bending arts, and that you are able to summon unique white flames that do not die. In an attempt to impress the master swordsman, Naruto replied, yes, I can. If you are interested, I can also tell you a little about where I come from. I will admit I would enjoy hearing about a land I have never seen or heard of before, but we will have to leave that matter for another time, as we are moving away from the matter at hand, which involves why you are both here, replied Piandao. Now, as you both know, I was contacted by your respected fathers to teach you the art of the sword. Normally I would refuse such requests, but even I cannot refuse the Fire Lord or the Dragon of the West when they ask me to teach you both. But I want to make this perfectly clear. You are to do everything I say without question. I will not refer to either of you by your titles, but you will call me master. The art of the sword is a long and arduous path, and to master it will not be easy. You will have to work hard and keep your mind open to all possibilities. If I am not happy with your progress, I will send you back to your fathers, regardless of the consequences. Am I clear? Both princes said, yes, master, and made a low bow to indicate that they understood. Good, Piandao said, apparently happy with what Zuko and Naruto had to say. We will begin training tomorrow. Zuko, you may leave. Fat here will show you to your room. Naruto said, and what about me, master? You will stay. Naruto, I wish to talk to you about a private matter concerning your father, replied Piandao. Wondering what Piandao was talking about, Naruto turned to his cousin Zuko, who simply shrugged his shoulders. However, Piandao returned his focus to the blonde boy after Zuko and Fat had left the room. When your father contacted me asking for me to teach you swordsmanship, he also asked me to help in several other matters, one of which involves your ability to perform airbending. He told you about that? A startled Naruto inquired. He did, but you need not worry, I will keep your secret and help you train in it. Naruto questioned, but how? Because he didn't think the old swords master was also a covert airbender. With a knowing smile, Piandao answered, oh, I've seen a lot in my time and have picked up a thing or two that may be of some help to you. Naruto nodded in response to Piandao's question. Now, as I've been led to understand, your father gave you a scroll on airbending, is that correct? Good, that should help speed things along, but still, as you're aware, we must keep this secret, which is why we will perform your airbending training at night and keep it hidden from your cousin. Normally, Naruto would have objected to this since he trusted his cousin, but after Piandao said this, he simply nodded. However, before he departed, his father told him that everyone would be safer if fewer people were aware of his ability to airbend. Piandao chose to discuss the next matter he wished to discuss with Naruto after observing his nod. Now on to the next matter your father wanted me to help you with it. Tell me, Naruto, has your father told you of the Order of the White Lotus? No, Naruto shook his head, asking, what's that? The Order of the White Lotus is an ancient and secret society that transcends the boundaries of the 4 nations, seeking philosophy, beauty, and truth. They are devoted to the sharing of ancient knowledge across national and political divides. It was formed centuries ago by the wisest scholars from all over the world. The order began as a club where these ancient masters could challenge one another on the Pai Sho table. They derived their name from the white lotus tile used in Pai Sho, a key element in their strategy. So my dad and you are a member of this White Lotus Order thing? Asked Naruto. Yes, although your father is much more than just a member, he is the Grand Master and Grand Lotus of the Order, a position that few have ever held in the Order. Naturally, Naruto was shocked to learn this since he never imagined his father would have such a significant role in a covert organization. But what do I have to do with the White Lotus? I'm not a member. Not yet. Your father has asked me to not only train in swordsmanship and help you with your airbending, but to also make you a Lotus apprentice. 3. While you're studying here, I will teach you of our ancient ways and show you things that few people have ever seen. Naturally, Naruto was in disbelief when Piandao concluded his explanation because he couldn't comprehend the idea of joining an ancient secret society such as the White Lotus. But before he could become overly enthusiastic, an idea struck him. But why me? Is it because my dad is a Grand Master? Or is it because of my white flames? Not exactly, replied Piandao, although your white flames are highly unusual and the fact you are the first person other than the Avatar to be able to bend more than one element. The reason why your father wants you to join the Order of the White Lotus is because he believes that you will have an enormous impact on the four nations, and will need the Order's help to be ready for it. But how? For centuries your people and the four nations have been separated by a great sea and have never come into contact with one another, let alone even known that the other existed. But when your father landed in your land and brought you back here, he revealed that there were other people and places that weren't known with abilities completely new to us. He also did the same thing for your people by landing there, and by raising you here he has made you a person of both lands and people. You have the potential of being a bridge between the four nations and your birthland, something that could change everything for both us and your people. Naruto was at a loss for words when Piandao concluded his explanation because he was shocked that his father was giving him so much destiny. Before he could finish, Piandao cut Naruto off. But what if I mess up? What if I bring the war to the elemental continent? What if people in my village still hate me and turn on Dad and the others? What if Naruto began. I know that this may be a great deal to take in and is a heavy burden, Naruto, but I believe you will make the right decisions and will rise to the occasion. As your father has faith in you, and the Grand Lotus is not a man who would place something like this on you unless he believed you could handle it. Besides, I am certain that you will not be alone when the time comes. Upon hearing this, Naruto began to relax a little. Piandao then got up and gave Naruto back Shao-Zi, and Naruto leapt onto the blonde's right shoulder. Piandao smiled kindly at Naruto and put his left hand on his free shoulder, saying, "Now then. I think it's time that I showed you to your room and allow you to get settled. Dinner will soon be ready, and I must confess Fat is a rather good cook." Naruto nodded at this and let the older man take the lead before they hurriedly left the room. After 6 months. The 6 months that had passed since the two boys arrived at Master Piandao's castle went by rather swiftly. Master Piandao required the boys to practice calligraphy, painting, writing, and drawing when they first began their training. The two princes, of course, saw little use in doing this, but they blindly obeyed their master's commands, just as they had promised before they began. However, Piandao subsequently clarified that calligraphy, drawing, and other artistic endeavors helped a swordsman maintain a sharp, fluid, and focused mind. Additionally, it taught them how to observe their environment and retain it when they only have a moment to do so. Initially, neither Zuko nor Naruto demonstrated much skill in calligraphy, painting, or drawing. Even though they were far from master artists, they gradually improved over time. The boys eventually advanced to more hands-on training, where they learned and practiced various sword techniques using wooden swords. They would then engage in combat with Fat, who unexpectedly proved to be a proficient swordsman. As time went on, Piandao began teaching them rock gardening, which he claimed taught them how to make the most of their environment. Surprisingly, both Zuko and Naruto made significant progress in a matter of months, and both were able to quickly defeat Fat in sparring. When Master Piandao realized this, he ordered the two boys to fight against him or against each other. Sometimes he would even engage in simultaneous sparring with both of them. Even though the outcome was always the same, the older man would always hand both boys their asses. After 4 months of training, Master Piandao determined that Zuko and Naruto were both ready for their own swords and that they would be made by them. Naturally, both boys were happy to hear this, and with Piandao and Fat's assistance, they started working on the swords after deciding on their design and the materials for them. After a month of arduous labor, their swords were finally finished. While Naruto created a long silver katana with a white sheath, a pure handle, and no guard, Zuko decided to create a pair of dual Dao swords. 5. Since real swords were heavier and more shaped than wooden training swords, Piandao had Naruto and Zuko practice wielding them after they were constructed. Additionally, Naruto started his training as an apprentice Lotus every other night for 6 months after arriving at the castle. He gained more knowledge about the Order of the White Lotus and its practices, including playing Pai Sho during these evenings. Naruto was obviously not overly surprised by this, considering how frequently his father had him play against him. With Piandeo's assistance, Naruto started his covert airbending training every third night. In contrast to his firebending, Naruto's airbending ability came much more naturally to him. He learned the fundamentals of airbending from some of Master Piandeo's scrolls, who got them over the course of several weeks from Iroh, who asked other White Lotus members if they had any books, scrolls, or information about airbending. Naruto was able to learn some of the more difficult moves found in the scroll he discovered in his father's room because of these scrolls, which taught him the fundamentals. However, even with his progress, Naruto's airbending abilities were rather restricted because the scroll could only teach him a certain number of moves, and the books and scrolls his father sent were either equally limited or didn't provide much information. Since few things survived the genocide of the air nomads, this was obviously not shocking. Over the course of the 6 months, Naruto and Zuko also worked together to hone their firebending skills, gradually enhancing each other's abilities. Additionally, they became closer, with Zuko actually grinning more and even laughing when Naruto joked or did something amusing. They did, however, come to an end, as all good things do, and Zuko was informed by his father that he was to return to the palace 2 months ahead of schedule. After learning of this, Piandao made the decision to oversee the two princes' final duel. "Begin!" shouted Piandao. Piandao's shout to start the fight sent the two princes charging forward. When he got close enough, the 13-year-old Zuko tried to cut a 12-year-old Naruto with a diagonal slash with his left-handed sword. Raising his katana, the blonde boy deflected the blow. Undeterred, Zuko then swung to his left and tried to slash at him once more, but Naruto was able to stop him this time by shoving Zuko's first sword aside and turning to face his second. Zuko was forced to go on the defensive when Naruto pushed Zuko's second sword away after blocking it. Given that Zuko had 2 swords while Naruto only had 1, it was obvious that he needed to keep Zuko on the defensive. However, as the battle went on, Zuko was able to move away from Naruto and slash at him from the right side after spotting a gap in Naruto's attacks. When Naruto saw this, he had to leap away, allowing Zuko to launch his attack. Naruto also launched the attack because he didn't want to give Zuko too much of an advantage. For the next few minutes, the two boys engaged in a furious sword fight. Piandao, the master swordsman, watched from above the two princes as his 2 students engaged in combat, each losing little ground to the other. Shao Ozi was also sitting on his shoulder, watching the battle, and occasionally he would cry out little things that Piandao assumed were applause for Naruto and Zuko. After a short while, Zuko's dual swords finally gave him the advantage, and he began pushing his cousin back into the wall behind him and out of the sparring area. However, the young blonde dodged one of Zuko's horizontal slashes and tried to cut at the elder prince's legs before Zuko could force Naruto back into the wall. Luckily, however, Zuko was able to leap into the air in time to avoid the slash. However, Naruto managed to roll away from him and return to the sparring ground after he landed back down. Zuko swiftly turned around, leapt into the air, and tried to use his dual swords to slash down on Naruto's head twice vertically so as not to give him any time to attack. However, Naruto jumped away and deflected the swords before they could strike him. Zuko advanced and swung his right-handed sword at Naruto after the latter dodged his double slash, who had to leap back again to avoid Zuko's second sword, which was approaching him, after barely blocking the swing with his own sword. After dodging Zuko's blow, Naruto tried to take the initiative by slashing at Zuko's exposed right side. However, the elder prince brought his right sword down and stopped the slash before it could cut Zuko. He then used his swords to push Naruto's katana away whenever he tried to make a double horizontal slash. Naruto swiftly retreated to avoid the double slash after realizing what Zuko was doing, leaving the elder prince vulnerable to assault. Unfortunately, Zuko leapt forward and tried another double vertical slash before Naruto could exploit it. As a result, Zuko was vulnerable to another attack and Naruto had to retreat once more to avoid it. Naruto saw an excellent chance to put an end to the battle and lifted his katana to slash at Zuko. However, the dark-haired boy fell backwards and delivered a double kick to Naruto's bare chest before he could swing his katana down on Zuko, sending the blonde with the spiky hair flying into the wall behind him. Piandao grinned upon seeing this because, after spending so much time training with Naruto, Zuko had significantly increased his flexibility and agility. Piandao noticed the blonde's quickness and agility when the boys first began sparring. Piandao had Zuko train with Naruto to increase his agility because he knew how useful such skills were in a sword fight. Even though Zuko's speed and agility had increased, Naruto was still far quicker and more nimble. He demonstrated this by flipping in midair, allowing his feet to strike the wall first, and then using the wall to propel himself in Zuko's direction. Naturally, Zuko was taken aback to see Naruto flying in his direction when he stood up again, and he barely managed to raise his sword in time to deflect Naruto's blow. However, as soon as he did, he shoved the blonde aside and tried to cut him with his sword in his right hand. Naruto tried to slash Zuko downward after spotting the sword and leaping into the air to avoid it. Then, dragging his sword to the ground, he threw some dirt into Naruto's eyes, temporarily blinding him and making him stop attacking and back away from his cousin. Zuko advanced and attacked Naruto, who had just regained his sight, unwilling to give up his advantage. Naruto moved quickly, raising his katana and going on the defensive, using it to block each of Zuko's blows. Zuko launched a barrage of unrelenting attacks on Naruto as the battle went on, preventing the blonde from launching a counterattack and forcing him to retreat. However, the spiky-haired prince angled the flat side of his sword to reflect sunlight into Zuko's eyes when Naruto deflected a downward slash from Zuko's right-hand sword, blinding the older boy and enabling Naruto to knock the sword out of his hand. Zuko quickly recovered and attempted to slash at Naruto with his left-hand sword. Naruto raised his katana to block the slash after catching a glimpse of the approaching sword out of the corner of his eye. Zuko was forced to drop his sword when he used his katana to make a small arc with it. Naruto moved in to finish the fight after Zuko lost his sword, but Zuko performed a backward flip that allowed him to land close to one of his fallen swords before Naruto could deliver the last blow. Naruto hurried over to stop Zuko from picking up his sword as soon as he saw where he had landed. Unfortunately, he arrived too late, and Zuko successfully deflected Naruto's blow. He then swiftly rolled over to his second sword and pushed Naruto's sword away. He then dashed into the bamboo forest close by and to the steps at the opposite end of the sparring ground. Naruto swiftly followed his cousin into the bamboo forest after spotting where they were going. When Zuko noticed that Naruto was following him, he started to chop down the bamboo trees that were in his way. This forced Naruto to chop down the fallen trees, which gave Zuko more time to get away. However, Zuko eventually caught up to Naruto, who then used the bamboo trees as a weapon, bending them and sending them flying in Naruto's direction, forcing him to cut them with his katana. Naruto chose to follow the shinobi text up after noticing that Zuko was using the bamboo trees against him. Naruto leapt to the top of the bamboo trees and leapt across them, directly over Zuko, using his shinobi training. He ambushed the unwary fire prince and kicked him hard in the side of the face, sending him flying to the forest's edge. After being kicked, Zuko was fortunate to be able to hold onto his two swords. As he stood up, he saw Naruto sprinting in his direction. Zuko left the bamboo forest and entered the open grass, realizing he couldn't risk Naruto ambushing him once more. As soon as Zuko and Naruto had left the bamboo forest, the two boys started talking to each other again. Zuko was the first to move, slashing at Naruto with his right-hand sword as he leapt into the air to avoid it. He then tried to strike downward, but Zuko used his left-handed sword to block it. Naruto continued to attack, but Zuko blocked it and then brought his right-hand sword from the side, which Naruto barely avoided with his katana as he retreated. The two boys engaged in a back-dot and forth, intense sword fight for the next few minutes. However, Zuko eventually overcame Naruto by pushing him to the edge of the adjacent steps. Naruto swiftly executed a backwards flip and landed at the bottom of the steps after realizing his perilous position. The two boys looked at each other, waiting to see who would initiate contact, as Naruto landed at the bottom of the steps. From his vantage point, the expert swordsman Piandao could see that the fight was coming to a close and that the next few moves would determine the result. Naruto made the first move after a few moments of intense staring, racing up the stairs before leaping into the air and delivering a strong downward slash. Zuko wasted no time in raising his swords to block Naruto's slash, which was more powerful than he had anticipated and forced him to retreat. In order to avoid wasting his opportunity, Naruto pushed forward and forced Zuko to the wall's edge. From there, he kicked the elder prince hard in the front, sending him flying to the sparring ground below. Naruto hurried down to the sparring ground, where Zuko had snatched himself up and lunged at the blonde with his dual swords, trailing behind his cousin. Without any delay, Naruto assumed a defensive posture and resumed his conflict with his older cousin. The two boys engaged in a furious altercation for the next few minutes, each attempting to push the other back and obtain the upper hand. After jumping into the air to dodge one of Zuko's slashes, Naruto eventually recovered his previous advantage and began to push Zuko back. The older boy was forced to retreat when he swung his own sword at Zuko's head. Then, by making Zuko defensive, Naruto used his advantage to seize the initiative and win the battle. Zuko was driven farther and farther back as the battle continued. Naturally, he attempted to strike back, making Naruto defensive. However, Zuko was momentarily blinded when Naruto dodged his double slash and dragged his sword onto the ground, sending some dirt into his eyes. Zuko's left sword was then knocked away and sent flying to the opposite end of the sparring area by Naruto. However, Zuko leapt away and separated them before Naruto could completely disarm the teenage prince. Naruto advanced and persisted in his unrelenting attack on Zuko because he didn't want to give him any time to defend himself, forcing the older boy to retreat and remain defensive. Aware that he had to take action, Zuko pushed the blonde back and blocked Naruto's downward slash, knocking him off balance and enabling Zuko to try a horizontal slash. Fortunately, though, Naruto was able to avoid the slash by falling backwards. He then used his innate agility to spin around on his back, kick Zuko off his feet, and land on his back. Naruto leapt to his feet and aimed his katana directly at Zuko's face after he had fallen onto his back. Naruto grinned and used Zuko's pet name to irritate his cousin, saying, "Looks like I win Zu. Naruto was shocked to see his cousin grin and say, "I wouldn't be so sure of that." Naruto saw that Zuko's sword tip was aimed at his stomach when he said this. Simultaneously, both boys heard their master say, "Enough. The match is over and is a draw." Both boys lowered their blades upon hearing this, and Naruto then extended his hand to assist Zuko in standing up. Instead, the older prince got up and moved to the opposite end of the battlefield to retrieve his second sword. Naruto rolled his eyes in frustration when Zuko declined his hand because his adopted cousin could be so obstinate at times and disliked assistance, viewing it as a sign of weakness. The two boys approached their master, who was grinning slightly, after Zuko had retrieved his other sword. Sha Ozi leapt from Piandao's shoulder into Naruto's arms as soon as they got there. He then climbed onto Naruto's right shoulder, causing the young monkey to pant and smile. Piandao exclaimed, "That was very well done, both of you. The two of you have shown exceptional skill in the art of the sword, and as you have shown, your hard work and dedication has paid off." The two boys grinned when they heard this because it meant a lot to them that Piandao had said it to them. "You Zuko have shown great skill with your dual Dao swords, using them to your advantage against Naruto. You have also shown resourcefulness and cunning by blinding Naruto and luring him into the bamboo forest and using your surroundings to help you fight him. These are traits that will serve you well later in life. But you also must be more flexible and less rigid and be willing to adapt to a new situation, for the key to being a master of the sword is to always remain open-minded. You also must learn to be calmer, for if you let your emotions control you, you allow your opponent to control the battle." When Zuko heard this, he nodded sympathetically and promised to try. Nodding, Piandao turned to Naruto. "You have also shown impressive skill in a short amount of time, Naruto. At first you were wild and untamed, swinging and slashing your sword at everything. But now you have become more focused and precise. You now understand that a sword is a weapon that is to be respected and can be used not only to end lives but to protect them when needed. Like Zuko, you have the ability to adapt to a situation and have shown to be quite resourceful when you reflected the sun off your blade to blind Zuko. You've even shown to be able to use your speed, agility and flexibility to your advantage and use them against larger and stronger opponents. But still you need to learn to mind your surroundings and not allow yourself to be lured into an unfavorable situation by your enemy. You also must learn to plan ahead more, as you take many risks when you fight, which could lead to your downfall if you are not careful." Similar to Zuko, Naruto nodded in comprehension and promised to give it a shot. "It was a pleasure teaching you, Prince Zuko, and I'm sorry to see you go soon, but I understand that there are duties that you need to attend to at the capital, and I hope you have a safe journey," Piandao said with a smile on his face as he turned to face Zuko. "Thank you for having me, Master Piandao. I am grateful to you for allowing me to be your student, and I will not forget what you have taught me." Piandao led the two princes to the dining room and remarked, "I'm glad to hear that. You are a fine student. Now come, let us have dinner before you leave. Fat has made a farewell meal." Later that day, Zuko returned to his room after his final meal at Piandao's castle, where he gathered his things and got ready to leave for the capital. After Zuko had finished backing up, he heard a knock on his door and heard the response, "Enter." Zuko saw the door open and Naruto and Sha Ozi enter the room, and Sha Ozi gave the Fire Prince a cheeky salute. Naruto said, "Hey Zu, finish packing?" Zuko glared and said, "Don't call me that." He detested that moniker. "Easy, Zuko, I'm only kidding. I just came to see if you needed any help packing." Zuko turned away from Naruto and shut his trunk, grunting, saying, "Thanks, but I'm fine, I just finished." Naruto shrugged and said, "Oh, okay then, just thought I could help." He then casually moved to the window, crossing his arms behind his head. As soon as Naruto did this, Shao Oz leapt to the top of the blonde's head and settled comfortably in Naruto's hair. Naruto gazed out the window overlooking the countryside and remarked, "I still can't believe your dad is calling you back early. You think he could wait 2 more months for you to finish your training here with Master Piandao?" Zuko replied, glancing at Naruto, who was still casually staring out the window. "Father said he needs me to return to the capital. Unlike you, Naruto, I have duties to perform as heir to the throne. There are things I need to know so that when I become Fire Lord, I can rule this country well." When Zuko saw this, he couldn't help but feel envious of Naruto because there were moments when he wished he could relax occasionally and enjoy himself like Naruto, free from the demands of being the heir apparent. Naruto turned to face Zuko and said, "Yeah, I understand, but it's still not going to be the same around here without you." Zuko smirked and said, "Yeah, you'll only have Fat now to play your pranks on." For the previous 6 months, Naruto had occasionally played practical jokes to liven up the castle. Naturally, Naruto tricked Zuko and Fat, but he was never able to defeat Master Piandao. The man always appeared to be one step ahead of Naruto and knew where he was hiding, as if he had eyes in the back of his head. "Good luck, Zuko. I'll see you in 2 months. Don't let Azula get to you and keep practicing, because the next time we spar, I'm going to kick your ass," Naruto said, grinning as he approached his cousin and extended his hand. Zuko grinned and thanked Naruto, saying he would not allow Azula to affect him and that Naruto could try again when they sparred. Naruto and Fat assisted Zuko with his belongings and said goodbye to him along with Master Piandao shortly after Fat arrived and announced that the royal procession had come to escort him. After 6 weeks, Master Piandao and Naruto were currently playing a friendly game of Pai Sho at a small table outside in the open rock garden. Shao Oz was sitting next to the board, watching the game while playing with the unused tiles during breaks. After placing his last pieces on the board, Naruto remarked, "I think this makes me the winner, Master?" "So it seems," Piandao said, raising an eyebrow and wearing an expression of admiration. "You've improved a great deal, Naruto. But I would expect nothing less from the son of the Dragon of the West." Naruto grinned and said, "Thanks, I had good teachers." Since Naruto would be returning to the capital in a few weeks, Piandao said, "I have to say I will miss these games of ours, when you leave," with a faint smile and a somewhat dejected expression. "But I'm sure your father misses you even more." Naruto, who hadn't seen his father in nearly 8 months, said, "Yeah, I miss him too. I can't wait to see him again. I'm sure that he will be very pleased with how you have grown. You've learned the ways of our order well, and when you return to the capital your father can begin the next stage of your training into the Order of the White Lotus." Naruto bowed slightly and said, "Thank you, Master Piandao," expressing his gratitude for all that the master had done for him. "Now then, if you don't mind, perhaps you would allow me a rematch and allow me to avenge my defeat?" Piandao said, grinning once more after nodding in agreement. Naruto was about to agree, grinning at this, when Fat rushed over to him with a furious expression on his face. "Prince Naruto, a messenger hawk just arrived with an urgent message from your father General Iroh. It concerns Prince Zuko." Naruto quickly grabbed the scroll from Fat and started reading his father's message. When he was done, he gasped in shock. "Naruto, what does the message say?" Piandao asked in a tone that was obviously worried. Naruto read the message again to make sure he hadn't misread it and said, "There was an incident at the palace. Zuko was challenged to an Agni Kai, he lost and was badly hurt from the battle. But soon after, he set the scroll aside and turned to face Piandao, saying, 'I'm sorry, Master, but I have to return to the capital today.'" After saying, "Of course," Piandao turned to face his butler and said, "Fat, go to the town and order the faster carriage they have." Fat answered, "At once," before he hurried into town. Naruto nodded his gratitude to the older man, picked up Shao Oz, and hurried to his room to pack. A few days later at the palace, the former Dragon of the West Iroh stood outside Prince Zuko's room, waiting for the medical staff to complete their examination of the wounded prince. He was waiting when he heard a familiar voice yelling, "Dad!" Iroh turned to see Naruto, his adopted son, running toward him with a worried expression on his face. Naruto. After sobbing, the older man hurried to greet the blonde and gave her a hug. "You received my message?" "Yes, I arrived as soon as I could. How are you, Zuko?" Naruto inquired. The blonde noticed that his adopted father, who had obviously not gotten much sleep in the previous few days, had a distressed expression on his face when Naruto asked this question. "I'm afraid it is not good news. Zuko's face has been badly burnt, where he will have scars that will last him the rest of his life." "Who would harm Zuko like that? Was it Azula?" Since his father's letter never identified the perpetrator, Naruto inquired. No, it was his father, the Fire Lord. What? Naruto screamed in shock. After Zuko spoke up, his outburst was viewed as a serious insult, and Ozai demanded that he take part in an Agni Kai. Naruto spent the next few minutes listening to what happened to his adopted cousin after he joined a war council meeting and spoke against a plan that would have resulted in the diversionary maneuver of sacrificing an entire division of new recruits. Unaware that he would confront his father, the Fire Lord, rather than the general he had previously insulted, Zuko had consented. Iroh continued by saying that as soon as Zuko realized he was going up against his father, he became contrite, knelt, refused to fight, and sobbed for his father's forgiveness. Ozai saw this as a sign of cowardice and another act of disrespect, and he burned Zuko's face to make sure he would never forget his humiliation. Naruto was shocked when Iroh finished telling him what had happened because he couldn't believe the Fire Lord would harm his own son. He was aware that Ozai frequently treated Zuko cruelly and coldly, but he never would have imagined that the Fire Lord would act in such a way. Naruto's expression turned fierce after he had taken a few minutes to process the news of Zuko's demise. Seeing this, Iroh started to fear that his adopted son would do something foolish, and as expected his son turned around and started to walk away from him. Naruto. Where are you heading? Iroh inquired. I'm going to track down that jerk Ozai and hold him accountable for what he did to Zuko. Angrily, Naruto marched down the hall in response. No, Naruto, you mustn't, Iroh retorted, dashing over to seize the young boy. Dad, let me go. Naruto screamed while attempting to break free from his father's hold. Fearful of his master's current behavior, Shao Ozi, who had been sitting on Naruto's shoulder the entire time, leapt off Naruto's shoulder and onto Iroh's shoulder as this was going on. No, Naruto, I won't allow you to do this. Attacking the Fire Lord will only make things worse, it won't alter Zuko's fate. So we do nothing but sit back. As he continued to battle his father, Naruto questioned angrily, we let him get away with this. I understand how you feel, Naruto, and I apologize, but Zuko accepted the Agni Kai, so there is nothing we can do. We are powerless to stop the Fire Lord's rule, even if it wasn't an official match. That is incorrect, Naruto said angrily, feeling compelled to take action, but Iroh turned him around to face him before he could finish speaking. No, Naruto, it isn't, but you must understand that in life there are some things that we cannot control nor do anything about. We just accept it. Then, Naruto looked at his adoptive father and asked angrily, but all he could do was nod sadly. The double doors to Zuko's room abruptly opened before Naruto could react to this. Naruto hurried over to inquire about Zuko's condition after noticing that the healer was bothering Iroh. Pardon me, but could you tell me about Prince Zuko? When they approached the healer, Iroh inquired. Iroh thanked the healer, who said, Prince Zuko is resting comfortably right now and is recovering well, he should be ready to leave tomorrow. Naruto turned to his adopted father as soon as the healer left them, asking, Dad, what was he talking about? Zuko is heading where? Iroh sighed in an attempt to answer Naruto's question, I'm afraid Prince Zuko is being banished. What? Incredulous, Naruto exclaimed, but why? The Fire Lord said that Zuko's refusal to battle my brother was a sign of cowardice and another act of disrespect. As a result, he banished Prince Zuko from Fire Nation and burned him in addition to depriving him of his right to the throne. So Zuko is unable to return home? Shocked, Naruto asked. The Fire Lord has declared that the only way Prince Zuko will be allowed to come home is if he is able to find and capture the Avatar. However, he might as well claim that Zuko will never be able to go back home. After the air nomads were exterminated more than a century ago, the Avatar vanished. For more than a century, no one has seen or heard of the Avatar. I know Naruto, but the Fire Lord has made his decision, and his mind cannot be changed once he has decided on something. Damn it, Naruto swore, clenching his fist. Naruto finally calmed down after a few minutes, at which point he and his father agreed to visit Zuko. Upon entering the room, Naruto noticed Zuko lying on his bed, gazing up at the ceiling. As they got closer, he had a big bandage covering his left eye on the left side of his face. Iroh said, Prince Zuko, you have a visitor. Hey Zuko, how are you doing? Naruto inquired. What do you think I'm feeling? Zuko shot back angrily, glancing at the blonde, who muttered a curse to himself for his ill-chosen words. Given his difficult beginning with his cousin, Naruto felt uncomfortable and said, I'm sorry, I know it was a stupid question to ask. Zuko replied, yeah it was, before returning his gaze to the ceiling. Prince Zuko, please I know you are upset, but Naruto is here because he is concerned for you, he wants to help you. Aid me. Zuko sat up and shouted angrily. How can he assist me? How can either of you assist me? Can you assist me in regaining my composure on the throne? Can you assist me in getting my honor back? Can you prevent me from being exiled by my father? Could you please take this off? As she got up and tore off the bandage from his left eye, revealing his scars to Naruto and Iroh, the teenage boy screamed. The young child couldn't help but wince when he saw the burns on the left side of Zuko's face, and Iroh was no different, though he chose to ignore them because he had witnessed his brother inflict these injuries on Zuko. Zuko simply scowled when he saw this, saying, I thought as much, no. One can help me. Naruto said, Zuko, please if you will Jua, but before he could say anything more, Zuko turned away from Naruto and Iroh and lay back on his bed, telling them to leave. Iroh uttered the words, Prince Zuko if you, but Zuko turned around and screamed, I said leave me. Both Naruto and Iroh made the decision to honor Zuko's wishes and leave the room because they didn't want to annoy him any longer. Iroh and Naruto left the room and returned to Iroh's room so they could continue their conversation without worrying about someone listening in. Please, Naruto, don't take anything Prince Zuko said personally. He is merely upset about what transpired and doesn't mean it. After going into his room, Iroh said, he will change his mind eventually. I know that and I don't blame him, I blame the Fire Lord, this is all his fault. Naruto, no matter how hard we try, we cannot undo what has already been done. Moving on and focusing on the future is the best we can do. Yay I know, but I just don't know if Zuko will be able to move past this, especially since he's going to be alone. Iroh abruptly remarked, he won't be alone. I've already declared that I'll be going with Prince Zuko when he departs the Fire Nation. He will require a companion to keep him from despairing and to remind him that there is still hope. Then I'm going with you, Iroh smiled and said, I was hoping you would say that, but before he could say anything more, he heard a knock on his door. When he opened it, a servant said he had a message for Naruto from the Fire Lord. Iroh was taken aback, took the message, and handed it to Naruto, who opened it right away and started reading it. His eyes widened in surprise as Naruto finished. Iroh was immediately alarmed upon seeing this, asking, What is it, Naruto? What is the message? I am to enroll in the Royal Military Academy for boys, according to a decree issued by the Fire Lord, for the benefit of the Fire Nation in its conflict with the Earth Kingdom and the Water Tribe, it says. I'm going to be sent there to receive the necessary training to use my special firebending. Iroh swiftly grabbed the scroll from Naruto and started reading it for himself as soon as he heard this. Iroh was compelled to take a seat after finishing because he was shocked that his brother would go to such lengths to pursue Naruto. Can the Fire Lord truly accomplish this, Dad? Naruto inquired. I'm worried, Naruto, because as I mentioned before, there aren't many things you can't do as Fire Lord. My brother was undoubtedly aware that you would accompany us when I declared that I would accompany Prince Zuko on his exile. He is ensuring that you remain in the Fire Nation and that he maintains some degree of control over you by forcing you to enroll in the military academy. Is there nothing we can do? Can't I refuse it or maybe sneak aboard with you and Zuko when you leave the Fire Nation? Inquired Naruto. Unfortunately, you are unable to disobey the Fire Lord's directives. If you were to sneak aboard Zuko's ship, the Fire Lord would soon discover your whereabouts and it might be deemed treason. After that, he would label you a deserter, pursue you, and return you to the Fire Nation, where I would be powerless to assist you. Staying here and telling you that I would be training you is the only way I can think of to stop this. But if you did that, then Zuko would be alone. Who knows what will happen to him then, especially with the way he is now. The former Dragon of the West knew that what Naruto had said was true, but he was at a loss for what to do and could only put his head in his hands. He could have stayed in the Fire Nation and left Zuko alone in his banishment if he had wanted to protect Naruto, but if he had accompanied Zuko, he would have left his adopted son alone in the Fire Nation while his brother, the Fire Lord, tried to use and manipulate him. It took Naruto several minutes to say, Dad, I want you to go with Zuko. What? You can't be serious, Naruto. Iroh looked at his blonde son and exclaimed, startled. I am. Dad, listen to me. Whether Zuko knows it or not, he needs you more than I do. Naruto, you can't expect me to leave you here alone. Shah Oz, isn't that correct? I won't be by myself. Looking at the small monkey that leapt off Iroh's shoulder and onto Naruto's, Naruto said, I'm ready to do it part. He then gave a small salute. Although I'm sure that Shah Oz would do a commendable job in helping to protect you, Naruto, Iroh said, turning back to his son after giving the small monkey a kind smile. I worry that you might require additional assistance because my brother will do everything in his power to influence you or change your mind. He can try, Naruto said frowningly because, to him, Ozai was the lowest kind of scum following his treatment of Zuko. Naruto approached his father and put his hand on Iroh's arm after noticing that he was still unsure. Dad, you once told me that sometimes we have to put other people's needs ahead of our own in order to do the right thing. Zuko needs you more than I do. He has a lot on his plate right now and needs someone to watch out for him. I don't want you to go any more than you want to leave me here. You must accompany him because neither of us wants anything more to happen to him. Naruto grinned and said, besides, I can handle myself here, since if Ozai thinks he can manipulate me into becoming one of his little puppets, he's going to be in for a rude awakening. Iroh could only grin after Naruto was done, saying, until I found you, Naruto, a part of me died along with Lu Ten. I believed that I would never experience what it was like to be a father or feel the satisfaction of seeing his son grow into a wonderful man. However, I have never felt more proud to be a father than I do now because of you. Whether Prince Zuko realizes it or not, he is extremely fortunate to have a kind cousin like you. You're a good boy, Naruto. After Iroh was done, he embraced his son tightly, and Naruto promptly returned the embrace. Iroh looked directly into Naruto's eyes as the two finally parted ways, saying, very well Naruto, I will go, but you must promise me that you will be careful. Do not underestimate my brother as he will stop at nothing to get what he wants. Naruto smiled back, don't worry, Dad, I won't. Good, I will have some of the White Lotus members who are here to look out for you and warn you if need be in the event that my brother tries something else. Naruto simply nodded once more at this point, and the two discussed what needed to be done for the rest of the day. The following day, having been at the docks to bid farewell to both his father and Zuko, who stayed far away from Naruto and sternly bid farewell to the blonde, Naruto watched as Zuko's ship sailed away from him. Iroh warned Naruto once more to exercise caution before departing, and Naruto promised to send a messenger named Hawk to the former general once a week to keep him informed of all developments. Naruto turned to Shah Oz after the ship had vanished from view and remarked, well, boy, it looks like it's just us for a while and we both have a rough road ahead of us. The small monkey, who was perched on Naruto's shoulder, approached his head at this point and began to pant, assuring Naruto that everything would be okay. Naruto grinned as he turned around and headed back to the palace, panting the little monkey.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.